evening and welcome to tonight's meeting of Burnside Council. Please stand for the acknowledgements. We acknowledge the land that we meet on today is the traditional land of the Kaurna people and that we respect their spiritual relationship with their country. We also acknowledge the Kaurna people as the custodians of the Adelaide region and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still as important to the Kaurna people today. We also pay respect to the cultural authority of Aboriginal people visiting or attending from other areas of South Australia and Australia. On behalf of the City of Burnside, I gratefully acknowledge and pay respect to those who gave their lives for this country and its people. We pray for understanding and guidance in our debate as we make decisions that will impact on the lives of all those who reside, study, work in and visit the City of Burnside. Grant us wisdom as we serve our community. Please be seated. I welcome members to the gallery, in the gallery and ask them to observe in respectful silence as the Chamber deliberates on matters that relate to the City of Burnside. Should there be a fire or any other emergency, the alarm will sound and you are asked to follow directions of Council staff. I need to remind all that council meetings are live streamed through the City of Burnside website and a copy of tonight's agenda is available by downloading from this website. There are a number of copies also scattered amongst in the gallery. I remind elected members of the importance of using their microphones appropriately so that those at home can hear clearly and request all in attendance to switch their mobile phones off or onto silent. And the first on the buzzer reminder to indicate who wishes to speak on the motion once we begin. Right, apologies, we have none tonight. Leave of absence, I believe Councillor Henschke.
Thank you, Mayor. That a leave of absence be granted for Councillor Henschke for the period 26th of September to 5th of October inclusive for personal reasons.
Councillor Hughes. Moved. Seconded Councillor Cornish. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Confirmation of minutes. Do I have a mover to confirm the minutes? Councillor Davis. Seconded by Councillor Cornish. All those in favour? Carried. Councillor Davis and Councillor Pickett, are you voting on this one? Sorry, I just didn't see your hands. Councillor Davis?
We have to do it all again. So
yes, all right, I'll do it again. So those in favour, please, raise your hands. Thank you. Carried unanimously. Now we get to deputations, and we do have a number of them tonight. As communicated today to the members from the Acting CEO, we have received a significant number of deputation requests which are focused around two different matters, Matilda Lane Eastwood and the climate change motion. We have received a total of 9 for both matters and they will be managed by topic, commencing with Matilda Lane, for which there will be a total of 4 deputations. As you can appreciate, a deputation is an important opportunity for community participation in the decision-making process of council, as it allows individuals or groups in the community to personally address and engage with the council and present their opinions to the meeting. With regard to Matilda Lane, the 4 approved for Matilda Lane must be received by council as affected residents have a right to make a submission to council in accordance with the Roads Opening and Closing Act of 1991. With regard to the climate change motion, from the total received of 5, I have approved the first 3 as they arrive within the 5 permitted in Council's Code of Practice. While I have at this stage declined 2, I understand that those requested a deputation may be present this evening and Council may wish to consider to permit their deputation to occur. I believe that all 5, including the 2 presently not approved, are in support of the relevant motion on notice. The 2 that I have not yet approved are from David Winterlick and Kim Worley. Can I just find out if they are both in attendance, please? You are? Kim Worley. Worley, thank you, Kim. And not David? Okay, thank you. Each deputy has a total of 5 minutes to make their deputation in accordance with our code, with one exception which I'll explain shortly. Any objection to this should be addressed on the basis that if slightly longer is required, consideration will be given to the request at the end of the representation. This will require council approval through a resolution for extension of time to proceed. Any allowance must be within reasonable minutes. A total of 10 minutes has been afforded to the deputation received from Ben Doyle in relation to Matilda Lane, as that deputation is representing 6 different properties. I believe this is reasonable, as alternatively the 6 properties could have requested individual representations, resulting in a total of 30 minutes. I remind the gallery of their obligations as members of the public during this time to be courteous and avoid disruption to the meeting in any form. So we will proceed with those deputations, and the first one is from Katina Maiolo. Is Katina present, please? Thank you. Would you mind coming to the seat in the middle, either one? And you heard about the 5 minutes, and the timing begins when you start speaking, and you will get a warning bell at 4 minutes. Just settle yourself down first. If you want to drink a water, by all means, help yourself as well. And then when you're ready, I'll turn my microphone off and you can just press the speak button just in front of you there. All right? Thank you.
I would like to speak on my objection to the closure of Matilda Lane. I have previously provided a written submission and I would refer Council to that written submission. I stand by the submission that I have made. It appears as attachment D in the minutes. The accuracy of the statements and the evidence that is presented in that attachment. The history of Matilda Lane and objection to closure goes back to 1991 when we first requested from Council to have fences which were encroaching onto the lane removed. Council at that time did not concede to that. They refused to do that and allowed encroachment on the lane to remain to this day. Now, this of course has produced a number of problems for both sides of the fence, if I can put it that way. I think it was an ill-advised decision by Council at that time, and certainly there have been some number of ramifications as a result. Now, our property at 1 Matilda Street, I believe we have proven that it has historically had the right to access without a doubt, and certainly currently has the right to access what is a public road. Now, the encroaching owners have made a lot of the invalid declaration of the public road back in 1980. The owners at that time, back in 1980, of the properties on Matilda Street had the opportunity, or could have had the opportunity in any ways, to address anything which they thought was invalid. They did not, obviously. And so we now have in 2019 current encroaching landholders going back in history trying to tell us to undo what was done then, and that they have been hard done by as a result. In the conversion of a private road to a public road, once that's carried out and once it appears in the Gazette, then that is a public road and all protections of the Act apply to it. Now, the encroaching owners also feel that their properties are the only properties with legal entitlement to access the land as a right of way. I refer to the evidence that's been provided, which is a subdivision plan of 1879, which clearly shows the right of way extending to allotment 27. And 1 Matilda Street, of course, has been originally the title was part of allotment 27 and allotment 25, and hence it did have the right to the right of way. And of course, in my written submission, there are a number of attachments which present historical certificates and evidence to the contrary that 3 to 13 were the only properties with legal entitlement. A further claim by encroaching owners is that the stable located at 1 Matilda Street has, and they emphasised at all times, blocked access, claiming that this was part of the Caledonian Brewery, and of course that is not supported by the City of Burnside Heritage Survey of 1987. Also, it's not supported by the council agenda item June 2014. We did not demolish an 1882 house. We do have pot plants on the side of the road, but they can be moved. They do not prevent anyone using the public road. The claim that you can't drive a vehicle on the lane, again, is not supported. You can drive a vehicle, it is quite wide enough, and there are plenty of small vehicles. We do not all have to drive four-wheel drives and SUVs, and should think about the climate. The encroaching owners also don't wish to have any easements. Well, they're going to have an easement for SA Water. That's a prescribed easement, and if there's going to be a prescribed easement for SA Water, why not for the other landholders? They would also like us to forget about all the encroachments, to forget about the... To forget about the misleading plans that have been put in at various times, and also about the development that has occurred over the lane without approvals. Some with, some without.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you wouldn't mind, and I should have said this before for other deputies as well, if you remain after you finish speaking, there may be some elected members who wish to speak or ask you questions. So I'll ask for anyone who wishes to speak or ask a question of Ms. Maiolo. No one there. So I'll just thank you very much anyway for coming along and giving your perspective on the matter. Thank you. Now I will call upon Tom Crompton on behalf of James Morris. So if you just introduce yourselves and suburb you're from, that would be helpful.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Tom Crompton from Botten Levinson, representing James Morris. This is James Morris's son, Sam Morris. James Morris is overseas at the moment and unavailable to attend in person. Our client, Mr. Morris, owns 77 to 79 and 81 Main Street at Eastwood. Allotments 190, 191 and 192 on Annexure A to the agenda for this evening's meeting. We lodged a written objection to the road closure under Section 13 of the Act. Since lodging that objection, we've learned more about the history of events that's led to the council's proposal to close this road. Mr. Morris strongly maintains his objection to the closure for all of the reasons in his written objection, but we instructed to just emphasise some further points. One of the first important issues I just want to raise is just, and to ensure that elected members direct their minds to Section 16 of the Roads Opening and Closing Act. That section contains the criteria that this council needs to have regard to when considering whether or not to close this road. One of those factors is the plan's principles and other matters that any planning authority would have to have regard to when considering applications for development under the Development Act. Now, as we said in our written objection, Mr. Morris has purchased his land always with the intent to develop it. He's got a number of options to do so that are consistent with the council's development plan, and he's had planning advice from Master Plan that has been annexed to our submission. The closure will, in effect, entirely cut off any public road access to one of his allotments, Lot 192, and leave it effectively landlocked. Now, aside from the fact that Mr Morris may be entitled to an easement of necessity in any event to give him his right to access that lot from a public road and any development on that land that might be approved, they're entitled to have that access. Cutting off that access will obviously have a profound impact on the value of all of Mr Morris's allotments. The council, as I said, has to consider that issue when it's considering whether to close the road. Again, directing elected members' minds to section 16. Another matter is whether the road process is reasonably required, whether this road is required as a road for public use. And I think it's plain from both the submissions of my client and also Mr Maiolo of 1 Main Street that this public road has always been required for a public use. Mr Maiolo, I think it's evident in the documents annexed to the report, has been raising concerns about this for many, many years, indicating his desire. My client, Mr Morris, equally has a desire to continue to use this public road for access, and as I say, allotment 192 requires that public road in order to be developed and used by my client, as he's entitled to do. We'd also direct the elected members to page 248 of the agenda. The Surveyor General, as most members would know, is required to endorse any decision of this council to close the road. There's already been some reluctance or objection to that, or the appropriateness of this closure by the Surveyor General. That's expressed in a letter from the Surveyor General's office on page 248. The Surveyor General was previously consulted about this issue of allotment 192 becoming landlocked, and has expressed similar sentiments to Mr Morris, that it would simply be untenable and inappropriate, and it may show, even if this council were to resolve to close the road, that you're not going to get any further with it in any event because of the position of the Surveyor General. If, contrary to Mr Morris's submissions, the road were to be closed, or the council were resolved to do so, he would emphatically join with Mr Maiolo in his objection. We know there's present proceedings in the Supreme Court on that issue, and we would join with that position. But if worse came to worse, we would seek an easement in favour of allotment 192 in the nature of a free and unrestricted right of way to provide that access that's necessary for Mr Morris's land. Our preference is that the road process simply be discontinued and that the council take appropriate action to remedy all of the unlawful encroachments. We say it's entirely inappropriate and an improper purpose for the council to proceed with the closure to avoid taking action on those issues.
Right, thank you very much, Mr Compton. Is there anyone who wishes to ask a question? Right, otherwise then I will thank you very much for both of you for coming and doing your deputation.
Thank you.
Now we have Mr Doyle, and I'll remind everyone that there is a 10-minute available time for Mr Doyle because he's representing 6 different people. Welcome, Mr Doyle.
Thank you, Mayor. I thank councillors for the opportunity to address you on behalf of the owners of numbers 3, 5, 7, 9, 11 and 13 Matilda Street. Councillors, you've been inundated by a mountain of paper, which I hope won't obscure a few basic realities about this matter. First, in dealing with the community position, there are in substance only 2 objectors, being first the owner and occupier of 1 Matilda Street, from whom you're going to hear separately, and the owner but not occupier of number 77 to 81 Main Street, from whom you've just heard. But by contrast, I'm speaking on behalf of 6 groups of owners and residents, namely the Matilda Street residents. The next point is that they're the people who are most obviously affected by this decision, because as I'll explain, they are people who have been given access to and have arranged their affairs on the basis that they are entitled to use the land in question. Thirdly, and by contrast, the objectors have not had the use of this land, and nor have they ever had any historical legal right to use the land. The fourth basic proposition is that it's clear that the council has legal power to close the public road, and it should simply proceed to do so if it considers it's a meritorious proposal. Councillors, you shouldn't be influenced by the existence of legal proceedings or the intimations that from objectors that they'll join legal proceedings. No doubt council will take its own independent legal advice, and if, as we expect, that confirms there's no legal impediment to closure, you should simply decide this on the merits. Fifth, as to the merits, they really all point one way, because the Matilda Street presidents are presently in occupation of the land, but are despite this prepared to make a substantial payment to council in order to regularise their ownership. By contrast, the claimed lost potential of access by the objectors is really illusory when you delve into it, and any attempt to create some kind of pedestrian lane now would not only be problematic but costly and unsafe. Councillors have been provided with an A3 piece of paper which conveniently illustrates both the current position and the location of the titles. Can I just briefly take you to the satellite image on the left to explain the current position? Councillors will see there that there are presently fences of the houses of the people for whom I act that run east-west over what's been described as a public road. There are also significant trees and structures of various kinds over the land in question. So the land is presently being used by the people whom I'm representing. Next, if the area of the road were to be formally closed, as is proposed, the only sense in which the title associated with Mr and Mrs Mayolo's property, which is at 1 Matilda Street, would be relevant is that at the very southern end of what appears as an orange T shape on the right-hand page, there is a connection between the public road and what is actually former stables and a structure that appears on the Mayolo's property. Now that, at that southern extremity, there is, as I've said, a structure which is not a garage and not approved as such. And so we're not really dealing here with vehicular access to 1 Matilda Street. Turning to the objection from the owners of numbers 77 to 81 Main Street, councillors will have noticed that there are 3 titles there, but they are commonly owned. It's important to note that neither of the dwellings on 77 to 81 Main Street are occupied. They've actually been derelict for decades. The suggestion of their development is really nothing more than that, just a suggestion. And the proposition that in some way this lane should not be closed because it would affect Lot 192 doesn't withstand scrutiny, with great respect. It's not separately owned. You can see the triangle there on the right-hand side of the page. It's hard to conceive of a situation where it could be sold or occupied separately. It's only about 200 square metres. It's too small for it to have its own dwelling, and it's only ever functioned as part of as vacant land together with other lots around it. In any case, you as councillors can't be expected to make a decision to cater for what's nothing more than a speculative possibility that at some point in the future there might be some realignment of those boundaries so as to create a commercially saleable block. More to the point, even if that were a possibility, vehicular access is simply never going to be feasible using this so-called road, which was in fact a night cart lane probably 100 years ago. It's about 3 metres wide, and as you can see from the dimensions on the right-hand side of the page, the angles are such that it could simply never accommodate safe vehicle traffic. Unlike some of the other lanes in this area, it's a dead end, and there are no rear car parks that permit convenient 3-point turns. So we're really only dealing with the concept of pedestrian access. So then coming back to pedestrian access and number 1 Matilda Street, we really ask the rhetorical question, why simply to service what are described as stables at the south of 1 Matilda Street is it necessary for there to be reinstated a lane? for the more or less exclusive use of one property, bearing in mind that that property also presently has the more or less exclusive use of its own lane, and that's the block that we've shaded in dark red to the north of 1 Matilda Street. So Matilda Street doesn't lack access to roads and lanes, and the justification of a further point of access is simply not made out. So we would say the merits really point all one way, and more than that, the proposal to close the road would result in a substantial economic benefit to council, whereas the alternative is really problematic on a number of levels. We think it's as simple as that, but I just want to briefly touch on one or two of the legal and historical matters that have been raised in opposition. The first is that the suggestion that somehow or other council would be acting invalidly if it progressed this road closure. With great respect, that's a furphy, and the reasons why it's a furphy are set out in the council's own defence to the judicial review proceedings, and I say no more about that. Secondly, there's been a suggestion that the owner of number 1 Matilda Street had a historical right of access under the right of way. We suggest that that's wrong. The right of way that was previously shown on the title before this was a public road was in favour of numbers 5 to 13 Matilda Street. Thirdly, there was the suggestion that somehow council has been derelict in its duty by not forcing the ejectment of or demolition of structures erected by the residents for whom I'm appearing. We reject that submission. We're not here to debate an ejectment action, and there's no such action on foot. But the fact of the matter is that many of these structures have been approved by council in the past, and the current owners of these properties have each acquired them in the reasonable expectation that they have the use of this land. Finally, it's strongly arguable that the declaration of this land as a public road in fact constituted an error or a legal mistake. And we've set out the reasons for that in our written submissions on which we rely, and we invite you to review, but we needn't develop them now. But the simple point to be made is that, as you've seen in the papers, there are aerial photographs from as long ago as 1959 which show that this land was not being used as a lane because the fences extended in an east-west direction over the lane in question. The result of that is that in 1980 it wasn't correct to close the road on the basis that it had uninterrupted public use for 10 years. So that basic condition for declaring it a public road wasn't in fact satisfied. But we needn't resolve any of that, because if council proceeds to close the road, that anomaly will be resolved. So we invite you, when you consider your position further in conference in November, to proceed to close the road. The Surveyor General will no doubt take whatever position he or she takes at the time, but that won't affect the merits of the proposal. The proposal to close the road addresses a historical anomaly, doesn't deprive any other resident of any present right that they have, and it will result in a financial benefit to the council. The alternative is not an attractive one. Finally, I mentioned that the Matilda Street residents have no objection to an SA Water easement, although they note that for as long as they can recall, SA Water has been able to have ready access from Matilda Street itself, and that's proved perfectly satisfactory. However, easements for the purposes of access by other objectors are a different matter entirely. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? No questions, then thank you very much for your presentation, and I will now call upon Mr. Stuart Henry on behalf of Mr. Maiolo.
Thank you, Mayor. I appear for Mr. Maiolo, the owner and occupier of number 1 Matilda Street. His primary position is to oppose the road closure. I might start by saying that this whole exercise has been started for a purpose which we say is legally improper, and that is to legitimise illegally constructed encroachments over a public road. The encroaching owners have just annexed parts of the public road and built structures on it for their own purposes. and then when they've been called out, they want the council to close the road and give them the land. That's not what the Roads Act is about. It's not what it's designed for, and if council goes along with this exercise, this will be sending a very bad message to the community. My client bought the property in 1990, some 10 years after the declaration of the public road. The public road was noted on his title at the time. He intended to start to redevelop the old stable building right from the start and to take access along the road that was noted on his title. In 1991, he complained about fencing, blocking access to the road. You'll see that at the agenda at page 236. There were no other structures or buildings on the road at that time. That's important because it's been suggested that these encroachments have been there for decades. They haven't, it's just the fencing that's been there. My client particularly complained about an encroachment under construction in 2012. That was the carport at number 13, Matilda. He consistently complained to the council about further encroachments and the council's failure to do anything about it. It looked like the council was going to do the right thing and ordered their removal, but nothing happened. And then council seems to have got a letter from the encroaching owner's lawyers, quote, making various claims at agenda page 118. Council then changed tack and started to close the road in order to, quote, resolve historical encroachments. This year, my client got planning approval for the redevelopment of the old stable into a studio accommodation for his ageing mother-in-law. That was a battle due to the state of the lane, but development was approved on appeal. The drawings for the proposal you will see in the agenda at page 178. Time doesn't permit me to take you to that page and to explain what is proposed, but you will see a studio accommodation with doors access to a courtyard with a fence along the public road. The terms on which it was approved include a condition to the effect, condition 5, that the solid 1.8 metre high fence shall be constructed and maintained, and any gate to the public road shall not encroach over the public land. So it's plainly contemplated that there will be access to the public land. I've got a bundle of documents that I want to table, the first of which is the correspondence that we have sent to the council, including the approval that I've just referred you to. So I'll do that in due course. So my client is perfectly entitled to build the studio and to take legal access along the public road. The road closure will completely deny that access. It's not to the point that access may be taken via Matilda Road alternatively. My client's entitled, and so is his mother-in-law, to take access along the gazetted public road to Main Street. And the fact that the adjoining owners have illegally obstructed the roadway is no basis to close off legal access to my client's property. That's particularly so where all of the owners have bought their land after the lane was made public in 1980. The earliest of the encroaching buyers was 1997, that's Hayley Quist at number 9, and the latest was 2011, that's Alex McKee at number 3. In the bundle, all of those papers indicate the points at which they bought, and importantly, the titles that they bought at the time explicitly indicated that the road was a public road. They have no legal or moral claim to defeat my client's legitimate right to access by pointing to some history, ancient or otherwise, when it was a private road owned by somewhere else, or even to 1980 when it was made public. This is just a land grab by people who bought their properties knowing it was a public road and then proceeded to fence it in and build over it, and you should not go along with it. Now, I haven't finished my submissions. I point out that I appear as of right under section 14B of the Roads Act. I don't appear in the discretion of the council, and it's not a deputation. So I haven't finished the submissions that I want to put under section 14B of the Roads Act.
We would need a resolution of council for this to continue. I've just been advised.
I'm happy to move to continue.
You'll move? All right. Is there a seconder, please? Councillor Jones moved. For how long? Another 5 minutes? 5 minutes? And see if we get a seconder first.
I'll see if I can do it in 5.
All right. Seconded by Councillor Henschke. Those in favour? Those against? Right, carried, but not unanimously. All right, so please continue and we'll start again from the beginning.
So that's our primary position, but if council does insist on closing the road, my client wants to buy it. He's put in a realistic offer for the land. He needs the land for access to the studio that I've referred to. His offer is confirmation of his bona fide desire to take access. There's no reason why the council wouldn't sell the land to him. If you insist on selling the land to the illegal encroachers for less than my client is offering, then that's only going to show that council's purpose in closing the road is simply to regularise the illegal encroachments, which is not a proper purpose, as I've explained. Our third position is that even if council did decide to close it and sell it to the illegal encroachers, at a minimum, my client's entitled to an easement to replace the public access rights that he currently enjoys. Under Section 18(2)(d) of the Roads Act, an easement is appropriate if a person's use or enjoyment of adjoining land would be substantially affected if the easement isn't granted. Plainly, my client's use and enjoyment would be substantially affected and detrimentally so if the road is closed and no easement is granted. He will not be able to get access to the proposed doorway to the studio apartment. And if the easement is granted, as it must be, then the encroachments will need to be removed, and all council will have achieved is perhaps a lower purchase price and the avoidance of its responsibility of getting these encroachments removed. So we would say that that is a very lower order option for the council, and it just highlights that the proper order should be the council should take the correct legal path of requiring the removal of the encroachments rather than the incorrect path of trying to close the road. So that's what we say about this. I just wanted to address why the reasons put by the opponents. They say close the road. Their 5 reasons are in the agenda at page 257. There's 5 of them. Thought I'd just refer to them. Firstly, they say the outcome is consistent with their legal entitlements of 3 to 13. That is, closure would be consistent with it. That's not right, frankly. None of them ever had a legal entitlement to do anything other than access a public road at their rear, noted on their titles. And the previous owner's only legal entitlement was to access a private lane before it was a public road. Leaving it as a public road is already consistent with their rights. The second proposition was that this would rectify historical errors in the declaration of the public road. Well, frankly, none of them owned their land when that declaration was made. It's been public since 1980. These alleged errors occurred 40 years ago, and they simply can't invalidate the declaration that was made. Council can't just overturn its previous resolution to make the lane public or pretend that it didn't happen, which is what the objectors or what the encroachers are saying you should do. Thirdly, it said that it reflects the physical status as it has stood for decades. Well, the only thing that's been there for decades is these fences across the road. You can't have a situation where a group of abutting owners physically annex a public road simply by fencing it in and then have them claim an entitlement to ownership arising from their illegal annexation. Council shouldn't countenance exactly that same approach through a backdoor attempt under the guise of the Roads Opening and Closing Act. The fourth point was that this would bring certainty of status and final resolution. There's no lack of certainty here. It's a public road. It should be open and unimpeded, and there shouldn't be fences or encroachments. Final resolution can be achieved by leaving the road public and getting the illegal encroachments off it. And then it said it's a reasonable and appropriate solution. Well, closure is no such thing. The reasonable and appropriate solution is for the illegal encroachments to be removed and the rights of the public, including my client, his wife and his mother-in-law, to be restored. The only reasonable thing for the council to do is to decline to close the road and to require that the encroachments and the fences be removed. Now, I've referred to these bundle of documents which I said I'd table, if I may do that.
I have, we've read the local government procedures, and you can't table them because they have to have been provided to this acting CEO within at least 24 hours prior to. However, you can distribute them. You can present them to everybody around the table. All right?
Do you want me to do that physically, or can that be?
We will get one of our staff to do that.
Yeah, that'd be
All
fine.
right? Thank you.
I'm happy to explain them, and it might actually be worthwhile. I won't.
We've got 10 minutes, isn't it?
So you get questions from them.
Right. What do you mean questions?
If they've got questions about this.
Right. So, does anyone have a question that they wish to ask at this point in time? The end of this deputation. I haven't any questions on my screen, so I think this would come back into the deputation.
So do you want me to explain what's in this bundle?
We want to put this as part of the next report.
Right.
We can speak about this part.
We're going to include this as part of the next report.
Yes.
So there will be a confidential meeting at the time, but these documents will be provided for the decision-making for that
Yeah.
meeting.
Yeah. Do you want me to explain them?
And if you wish to make a deputation prior to that, then you can.
Sorry, another deputation.
You may do if you wish to.
When this is tabled in the report
Yeah.
at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When this is tabled in the report, when people have had a chance to read it properly and
Yeah.
digest it at that point in time prior to the meeting that we make a decision, you can do a deputation on that night,
Right.
although the discussion will take place later in a confidential mode. You can still come and do a deputation at the beginning of that meeting.
Yeah. Will the report to the confidential meeting be published?
Not if it's held in confidence,
Right.
but council will have to make that resolution on the night.
Yeah.
I mean, the council may choose for it to not be held in confidence, but that decision is made on the night when we do debate the issue.
Okay. So do you want me just to give you a brief explanation of what's in here, or?
If he gets asked to do so.
Only if you get asked to do so from one of the elected
Oh,
members
okay.
around the table.
Sure.
And I haven't got anyone on my screen, so,
I think it's self-explanatory, and we've
It should be.
highlighted in yellow the relevant
okay.
parts of the.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
That was the last deputation in relation to Matilda Lane. So now we're going to move to the first deputation for climate change, and that is from Corinne Ang. Corinne, I believe you understand this procedure. You've done one once before, haven't you?
As in send lots of emails.
No. Okay, doesn't matter. You know how to do it now because you've had lots of examples provided.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, first deputation. Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Okay, my name is Corinne Ang, and I'm from Kensington Gardens. I'm here to make a deputation to support the motion for Burnside Council to declare a climate emergency. In the first assessment report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, also known as IPCC, in 1990, leading climate scientists were already confident, they already had sufficient evidence that human activities were substantially increasing the atmospheric concentration of greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide, methane, which was causing the Earth's surface to warm up. Subsequent IPCC reports in 1996, 2001, 2007, 2014 reported similar findings. However, with each report, the level of confidence that they had in their findings were actually increased as technology advanced and they could actually do more in-depth research. By the fifth report, it was very, very clearly stated in that report that warming of the atmosphere and the ocean system is unequivocal. There is a clear human influence on the climate, and it is very extremely likely that human influence has been the dominant cause of observed warming since 1950, with the level of confidence having increased since the fourth report. Now, little has been done since the 1990 report in terms of effective government policies to reduce carbon emissions, despite repeated warnings by expert scientists. So if you can see in one of the climate levels graphs that I emailed to through the CEO to the councillors, you can see for yourself that emission levels have actually gone up quite significantly. So plans such as the Kyoto Emissions Target 2020, the Paris Agreement on Climate Change in 2015 were made, but the level of commitment by various developed and undeveloped countries is really quite mixed. So this has led to a special report on global warming by the IPCC in 2018. And the key finding is that, I mean, apart from reiterating that there's human influence on climate change and all that, is that we have to limit global warming to within 1.5 degrees Celsius, because even if it increased by 2 degrees Celsius, it will actually cause a lot of challenging impacts on the ecosystem, human health, livelihood, food security, water supply, human security, and economic growth. So one of the things that came out also from the IPCC special report is this thing called a carbon budget. And it is the estimated amount of carbon dioxide that the world can emit while still having a good chance of limiting global warming to within 1.5 degrees Celsius. So based on the report, based on their estimated calculations, we have a 66% chance of avoiding this 1.5 degree warming to avoid so we have 120 gigatons of carbon dioxide remaining to be used if we want to have a 66% chance of avoiding a 1.5 degrees Celsius warming. So essentially we have, if business as usual proceeded, we have about 3 years from early 2018 to keep within that limit. For a 50% chance of avoiding a 1.5 degree warming, then the remaining budget is 268 gigaton of carbon dioxide, which is about 7 years worth of emissions from 2018. Australia's greenhouse gas emissions has increased in the past 4 years, as you can see from one of the charts that I've presented as well. And the only reason why we are complying with the Kyoto 2020 emissions target is because we are actually factoring a carryover of emission credits from the first Kyoto period, which ended in 2012. So according to the Climate Council of Australia, if other countries were to actually follow Australia's climate policies, the global temperature rise is actually projected to increase by 4%. And that will actually present a serious challenge for human survival. So in a nutshell, we need to change. We need accelerated changes on the council level, state level, federal level. All layers need to change if we are actually to survive. And I stayed within my 5 minutes. Thank you very much.
Do we have any questions, please? No questions? Then I will say thank you very much for your deputation.
Thank you.
I'll now call upon Georgie D. You understand the process now, Georgie?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Make yourself comfortable. Have a glass of water if you wish, and when
Yeah,
you
might.
start speaking, we'll start the bell.
Sure.
The timer, I mean.
You.
Yeah.
How does this work?
Just pull the rubber off,
Oh,
lift it up. That's it. Those people who came in a little late,
Don't
if you
wanna
want
waste
to
water.
join the gallery,
There's a
you
climate
can.
crisis
Otherwise, you're happy. If you're happy, we can leave you there. Okay. Do you want to, you happy there? Okay.
Okay.
All right.
So, I'm actually Georgina Hart, so the D's my maiden name. But I'm Georgina Hart, I'm from Parkside. So I want to thank you to the Mayor and all the councillors from the City of Burnside for allowing me to speak this evening on this matter. I've come today to urge you all to support the motion to declare a climate emergency. I'm here as a concerned citizen and as a mother of 2 young children. Our family attended the Global Student Strike for Climate on Friday, demanding action on the climate crisis. And having attended many such gatherings over the years, some with very little attendance, we were so thrilled to see thousands take to the streets in Adelaide. We were part of 300,000 in Australia and millions globally. While it was a moment of solidarity, it was twinged with sadness. That morning, my 7-year-old son decided to make a new placard this time, all by himself. He asked me how to spell future. And then he wrote this: I want a future. I felt so many mixed emotions. I was so proud of him, but I felt sadness and anger that children were having to fight for their future. And I also felt a sense of shame in that moment, the judgment of others. Why am I taking my 7 and 8-year-old kids to this strike? I'm on governing council at their school and the sustainability mum at their school, and they're having a special ocean awareness fundraiser today, and I'm not even going to be there, and my kids are missing out on all of the fun. I momentarily thought, what sort of mum am I to expose them to this climate crisis reality? The blame, both real and perceived, and the deafening silence from too many in the community that just simply sit on the fence. It struck me. But then I realised I can't protect my children from this crisis. There is nothing I can do to stop it. No amount of band-aids will fix it. I can tell my children that if they work hard and do their best, they can have a wonderful future ahead. But I cannot even guarantee that when they reach adulthood, that they will have access to the basic requirements for life, like clean water and adequate food. I decided that this year, that gleaning facts from the largely ignored 2019 United Nations IPBES report on biodiversity and making some of them palatable to my children might provide more insight and education than the news of the royal birth that dominated the media around the time the biodiversity report came out. Over time, I have spoken to my children about the issues that threaten our planet and allowed them to be influenced and inspired by many speaking out about this cause, including inspirational teenagers, role models that they can actually look up to. These role models have encouraged us to come together. We need mass mobilisation to tackle the climate crisis, and so I'm here tonight pleading with you all to take that first critical step to mobilise, to use adequate terminology to represent the climate crisis for what it actually is, a crisis. A climate emergency declaration is an acknowledgement of the severity of this situation locally and globally. It may appear to be such strong language, and perhaps it is, but like the great Sir David Attenborough said, we cannot be radical enough in dealing with climate change. The United Nations IPCC report on climate change and the previously mentioned biodiversity report, which drew on the expertise of 15,000 global scientists over a 3-year period, really makes it clear. We are running out of time to stop the devastating effects of global warming. We must act now if we want any chance. In fact, we needed to act years ago to prevent what has already occurred and some damage that is irreversible. It is not to save what is left. A fact, currently only 2% of land-dwelling mammals are wildlife, and Australian native mammals are in deep trouble. We must act. We must be strong in our language and let that reflect the truth. We must also understand that without acknowledging this emergency, this crisis, we simply won't treat it as one. Local issues like skate parks, which are important but not critical, will always be the focus point. Climate mitigation and preventative strategies with strong policies and necessary funding won't take front and centre as needed if it is simply seen as a side issue or an environmental issue. It is beyond that. It is a health issue, a social justice issue, and an economic issue. If we don't declare a climate emergency or just water it down with amendments, blame will continue to be apportioned to the individual. You drive a car. Not enough responsibility will be placed on our governing bodies elected to serve our best interests. Looking at our federal government and climate policies, it is clear they are failing. We need local governments stepping up and every tier of our society, our community, working together to tackle this collectively to create a path forward. We just need the courage to make the first step. Declaring a climate emergency is that critical first step. Thank you for listening to me and thank you for your time.
Just before you disappear, just in case there are any questions.
Sure.
Is there anyone who wishes to have a question? No? All right. Thank you very much for your presentation, Georgia.
Thank you.
Now I call upon Sridharan. Sridharan, is that right? Sri. Thank you, Sri.
I sit here?
Yes, either seat is fine.
Oh, okay.
And I'll turn my microphone off and you can introduce yourself.
Okay. Well, my name is Shri Priya. I live in Frueville. So, when it comes to the climate crisis, many councils are either hesitant to acknowledge the global predicament or are just uneducated on the topic, and these reasons used to be valid enough not to take action. But goodness, time is really running out, and no excuse is good enough anymore. Human-caused climate change is so drastic that the IPCC have warned that we only have 11 years to drastically change course to limit rising temperatures, to perhaps very slightly lessen worsening extreme weather events like hailstorms, floods, bushfires, all which are, I hope you know, are not going to happen, but are happening in the world right now. It's affecting our environment, animals, humans, and mostly all the people who don't deserve to be. Now, I only do things if it goes towards my end of year 9 reports, but when I was asked to do this, I actually did it because the request that my 250 petition signers and I are asking Burnside I think is really important, which is declare a climate emergency and take solid action upon it, which goes according to the item 10.3 and 13.4 in the agenda. So as a council, Burnside has a role in building a nationwide climate emergency response, as we lead by example, just like my teacher used to say, show, don't tell. In Australia, 42 councils have declared climate emergencies, 800 worldwide, representing approximately 140 million citizens. And joining this large number of councils who have declared would mean many things. It would mean that Burnside hasn't failed to answer the favour of my 250 petition signers. It would mean becoming one of the first main councils to declare in Adelaide. It would also mean that Burnside sets an example among the rest of councils, encouraging the others to also take action. And personally, what I think is most important is that Burnside will do our respective part to aid Mother Earth. Because, as you know, we all have varying amounts of duty left to be done, and most of us just pass it on to the newer generations, which I'm glad Burnside is considering not to do. This year, the Adelaide Hills declared a climate emergency unanimously, saying it was a global predicament, but also a local problem that councils should address. It ensures that future generations enjoy, at a minimum, the same quality of life that we experience today. Because, as you know, your generation only borrows the world from the next generation, like my own. And soon it'll be like returning lost property that's extremely damaged. Councillor Robert Sims told In Daily that he would call that Adelaide is facing a climate emergency. It represents a serious threat to our well-being, economy, built infrastructure, services, water supplies, environment, and a reputation as a livable city. To take the required action for the declaration, they have also included a target of 100% renewable energy to be in their carbon management plan. Now, why would we want Burnside to declare and commit to this particular strong action that Adelaide Hills is also doing? Why renewables, like the mitigation activity also suggests? Well, put simply, it'll reflect the need for urgent action. It will drive down emissions and at the same time save our ratepayers money. It's a win-win. This is evidenced by the savings already achieved by the Tweedshire Council, who recently installed rooftop and ground-based solar, and it saved their ratepayers more than $225,000 annually. And aside from these economic benefits, Strong climate actions deliver new green jobs, preserve wildlife and habitats, and even more so, improve the lives of people living here. And I must admit, I have a fear of this situation as a whole. Our climate crisis is so overwhelming, we just tend to not take any action at all, in fear of it, pretend it's not even there even. But that didn't help us before. It's certainly not going to help us now, and it will not help us in the future. Thank you.
Councillor Carbone.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Sheree, for coming in. Elected members, I should declare that Sheree and I have had a few conversations about tonight, and you should know that she's very mature for her age, and she came tonight even without her parents being here. So I think that's very admirable. And I suppose, look, it's not a question, just a bit of a request to Sheree, if I may. But Sheree, look, I've been inspired by everything that we've been doing over the past few months. You are, of course, a member of this ward, okay, and of course this council. And I would be honoured if one day, with your leadership, you too could be part of this very council. So good luck to you in your future.
Thank you.
Councillor Davey.
Thank you very much for coming along tonight. I just wanted to say I found that very inspiring, and I think you're a wonderful representative of our younger generation in Burnside, so thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for coming along. Yes, you,
Thank you.
you can relax now.
Oh, it's scary.
And be assured that we took everything you said on board. All right, thank you. The next person is... no, we have completed the three that were agreed to. So now, Councillor Hubel, you have a motion?
Yes, I wanted to move that Mr Worley and Mr Wunderlich have their deputations heard. They're both in attendance, I understand.
Do we have a seconder, please? Councillor Hughes? All those in favour? Against? Carried? Right, so according to the list, Mr Wunderlich is first. Is Mr Wunderlich here? Yes, thank you.
Is this one?
And you understand, David,
Yes,
the process?
I do. Yep. Thank you very much. I understood my deputation was not to be heard tonight, so I'll keep it very short. In thinking about tonight, the argument that constantly comes up is that Australia emits a very small proportion of the world's global emissions. Well, my council rates represent a very small proportion of Burnside Council's total rate revenue. So how would you feel if I didn't pay it? The difference would be that, of course, you have power to compel me to pay it. But using the same logic, why would you? It doesn't matter. It's only a small proportion. The reason why that logic doesn't stand up is the power of example, and how example leads to collective action, and how that leads to more and more people jumping on board, and that's how you get bigger change. So even though you may be a small part of an overall problem, your example is part of the demonstration of the solution. And when everybody joins in, you then have a powerful force for change. Another common argument why councils shouldn't act is that it's not their business. I believe, I haven't checked recently, but I believe the objects of the Local Government Act include reference to representing the broad interests of your community and your ratepayers and residents. But we also have heard that there's 42 councils in Australia that have considered it their business to act on this issue. We know there's 3 or 4 in South Australia. We know that councils have passed motions on things like lifting the New Start allowance. So while these matters are not commonly seen as day-to-day business of council in the same way that roads, rates and rubbish might be, Councils certainly choose to act on them and do act on them and do not experience any negative consequences for doing so. So you can choose to act or you can choose not to act, but that's your choice. There's nothing preventing you from taking a stand on this issue. I guess the third thing that's very important to think about is we are speaking about this purely in terms of the costs of not acting, and those costs are dramatic and scary. But we should also think about the opportunities from acting. What's coming into being, what will happen, is a whole new economy. A whole new economy is being created if you even think of the proportion of houses that had solar 10 or 15 years ago and how that's been transformed. Now, we can choose for our country and this city to be part of that new economy. That's the opportunity in this change, or we could ignore it. The sooner we adapt, the sooner we act, the sooner we can be part of that opportunity. So I think you've heard some of the more scientific arguments. I guess the thrust of my comments is that there is, if you do believe this is an issue, there is no reason not to act. The excuse that we're not a significant part of the problem is not a valid excuse. We don't accept it anywhere else. We don't accept it with our rates. We don't accept it with whether or not we should speed or not. We don't accept it in almost every other area. It's just a convenient line to use here. So you can use that argument, but if you use that argument, then you don't really have a moral argument about rate paying. All you have is your power to compel people. It certainly is council's business if council chooses to make it its business, and there's no legal obstacle to that, and other councils are doing so. So I hope tonight Burnside becomes part of the solution by providing that example, by being part of the solution instead of just denying the problem. Thank you.
Do we have any questions? No? Thank you very much for coming on, Mr. Windlick. Finally, Mr. Worley.
Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, councillors. I, like David, wasn't expecting to speak tonight, so I haven't prepared anything. However, I really just want to reiterate what the previous people have said on this issue. You've heard from our first speaker about some of the facts, the science that supports strong immediate action on climate change. You've heard from a mother of 2 young children about how it is impacting society and local society and wider society in a social way. And I have a young daughter just about to go to primary school. I've had several moments this year where I've looked at her and I've thought, what is your future going to be? What are we leaving for you? You know, I want you to have a lovely future, like I've had a lovely past, and I've enjoyed the beautiful surrounds of this area and where I grew up in the Mitcham Council area. But I can't see that happening if we don't take immediate and strong action at all levels of the community, all levels of government, and also personal action, corporate action. We need action from every single facet of society to address this problem. Now, this council passing this motion would be a small step. It's not a big thing. It could lead to big things, but it's not a big thing in itself. However, we can't ignore it just because it is a small step towards a greater good. We need to take those steps. We need to believe in cumulative action of this kind of decision, this kind of motion, inspiring other councils, inspiring other levels of government to take similar action and to take this problem seriously. Business as usual is just not going to cut it on this issue, and we need to recognise that, and we need to address it in an immediate way and in the best way possible that we possibly can. Now, the climate is something that affects us all. It's not discriminatory. Those who are well off are going to be affected just as much as those who are on the poorer end of society, and we need to be protecting and to be providing an environment and a society in which we can all live and thrive. And so decisions like these are extremely vital and important in taking steps towards this. Once again, I just really urge you to take this matter very seriously and to pass this motion and to follow the steps that are in the motion in terms of integrating this into council policy, and to I was going to say putting pressure, but communicating with other levels of government on this issue, and taking a stand and being taking a leading light in this issue. Thank you.
For someone who wasn't prepared, you did very well. Thank you. Is there anyone who wishes to ask a question? Otherwise, I will thank you again very much. Now we move back into the formal agenda, and number 7, petitions. We don't have any this evening. Public question time. I'm not aware of anyone wishing to ask a question in that. So we'll move on to questions on notice, the answers to which have been tabled about feral cats. And then I seek leave of the meeting to move the two climate issues, number 10.3 and 13.4, forward at this point in time. Sorry, 13.4 first, and then followed up with 10.3, and do those in that order. And while we have an audience who are obviously keen to find out the outcome, we will debate those issues first, if it is okay with the meeting. So, Councillor Davis? You're happy for that? Right, those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. All right, thank you. So we move to 13.4 on page 289, and I need someone to move that, or unless you wish it to just go through. On consent, okay, so, all right. Councillor Hughes?
I'll move it. I just wanted to thank the administration for the efforts that went into the report. I suspect that all of the debate will happen with Councillor Hibble's motion, so I'm happy to move with the officer's recommendation.
And Councillor Davis, you wishing to second that?
Yeah, all the fireworks will happen in Councillor Hubel's motion, I'm sure, so we'll wait till then.
Right, so is there anyone who wishes to discuss this? Otherwise I'll put to the vote. Right, those who are in favour? Oh, sorry, Councillor. Sorry, Councillor.
I actually want to move an amendment that the report be received, and 2, that a report be brought to Council in 6 months, which addresses progress with the current projects and initiatives included in the report.
Worship. Two minor matters with that one. Technically, it's different substantially to the existing motion that you're considering, because you're adding to it. So it's not a true amendment. So technically, you would have to vote down that the report be received and then raise a new motion on that one. However, in the item that will be discussed at 10.3, there is a similar motion in there. I would suggest that perhaps you consider it as part of that, or you can maybe cover it at that point.
Thank you for the clarification. My rationale was, and notwithstanding all the other items, I guess we've got a plethora of issues. It's a very important report and very detailed, but it does actually highlight in the report that reports are coming back to us, and so my intention was just to formalise that.
I'll just have the CEO, acting CEO, say that they'll take that on board and ensure that there is feedback that comes back.
You don't need a motion.
Don't need an emotion on that.
So when will we get the feedback?
No, it should be a motion. We're directing rather than.
That's fine. Then you'd have to vote this down, and then you would have to raise a new
Well,
motion.
I'm happy to accept it.
If someone will second it, that would be great.
Councillor-
Well, it's intended to
Councillor Hughes
augment
and Councillor
the
Davis
work
can
that,
accept it.
that everybody's done,
All right,
especially
if Councillor Hughes and Councillor Davis accept it, then we, as a variation, not an amendment, then that can be put to the vote.
Thank you. Because that's all it's intended.
So, Councillor Davis, are you happy with that?
I am.
Sorry, Councillor Hughes first.
I'll accept.
And Councillor Davis, you're
No,
seconding,
no,
are you
yeah.
happy with it? Okay. Now it becomes a motion, and does anyone else wish to speak on that motion, or do you not quite finished, Councillor Davis?
No, I'm happy for it to go.
Sorry, Councillor Piggott.
Magic. Because it's a variation.
Councillor Piggott.
I think we're in unusual territory here a little bit. I think the report was asked for by Councillor Hughes and asked for by Council, but raised initially by Councillor Hughes. And if you read the report, as we always do, but in the absence of the motion on notice that came through from Councillor Hubel, this council would actually discuss this report actually quite at length, I feel, and it would have had done more than just receive the report, and would do things like, you know, acknowledge how much is happening already in this sphere and ask to be updated on a regular basis as to whether we're still going down that track. And I think that's probably supported by most people in the gallery. So I'm certainly happy to support that. I think, given that there may be some controversy around the suite of things that Councillor Hubel is proposing in his motion on notice, it's a good thing if Council can vote this one up, because if it happens to fall over on one of the others, we then still have undertaking or a requirement of administration to continue to work on climate change and continue to report to us on a regular basis on their progress. So I'm very happy to support it.
Right, it goes, I have no one else on the screen, so it goes back to you, Councillor Hughes. Are you happy for it to go to the vote? All right, those in favour? Those against? Carried unanimously. Now we'll move to 10.3, Councillor Hubel, page 13.
Thank you, Your Worship. Given the motion is printed out there, can I dispense with reading it out? Thank you. I'm not going to talk tonight about the science behind global warming, but what matters now is what we can do about the risks that we face. The Australian Medical Association has classified climate change as a health emergency. The World Health Organization has stated this year that climate change endangers human health. Solutions exist and we need to act decisively to change its trajectory.
The Secretary-General of the United Nations has called climate change an emergency and one which governments need to react to decisively. This motion is what acting decisively looks like. In no uncertain terms, we are agreeing that climate change adaptation and climate change mitigation needs to be at the forefront of our strategic directions, our decision-making and our day-to-day operations. There is action appropriate for the federal government, there is action appropriate for the states. This is about what is in our power to control. We're doing a great deal already. For example, the city is seen as an industry leader in urban forestry management. But suffice it to say, there is much more we could be doing. This does not mean drop tools because the house is on fire. I've heard opposition to declaring a climate emergency take the form of, if it's an emergency and the house is on fire, we should stop doing everything and divert all our resources. That is not what this is about. The house on fire allegory does not apply in literal terms. It's relative terms. In relative terms to the life on the planet, we're talking about microseconds. We can do better than that. If we don't do something immediately for the planet's timeline, the future is catastrophic. This is hard to imagine in our little corner of Adelaide. In the wider community, members of the legal, financial and regulatory fields are vocal in their assessments. The Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank of Australia has stated that both the physical impact of climate change and the transition towards mitigation and adaptation are likely to have first-order economic effects, central to businesses, households and government, including local government like ours. The World Economic Forum has released its 2019 assessment of global risk, which identifies the failure of climate change mitigation and adaptation as a risk of high impact and high likelihood. Climate and environmental risks are clearly defined as the greatest risk to society on the 10-year horizon. But what does climate change mean for the city of Burnside? More frequent, long-running and intense heat waves, with the number of days over 40 degrees Celsius projected to double and average temperatures projected to increase. That's elderly citizens struggling to cope with the heat. Less rain overall, but more intense storms and flooding, with average annual rainfall projected to decrease, but the intensity of heavy rainfall events projected to increase. It's not good news if you live near a creek. More frequent and extreme fire danger days, with the number of extreme fire risk days projected to increase. That's the hills face zone in the firing line. Declaring climate change as an emergency is not virtue signalling because it is backed up here by us taking urgent and decisive action. Ensuring that climate change is a key priority within the development of the Council's strategic plan. Moving forward, the greatest risk to the health of our community should be at the forefront of our concerns. Protecting our community should be a priority in what we do, and we should put it at the forefront of development of our new strategic plan. We'll be developing a climate change policy. We will integrate climate change mitigation and adaptation into all our actions. For example, the decision-making matrix of the administration should involve considering climate change and environmental concerns. All motions considered by this chamber should take environmental concerns into account, as they do legal and financial. Monitoring and providing an annual report to Council on performance in relation to climate change and adaptation and mitigation. Administration should constantly be monitoring, measuring and reporting all actions undertaken in regards to climate change response. This is a specific action that enhances the consideration given to climate change action already. This leads to administration actively measuring the effectiveness of adaptation and mitigation actions with a mandate to continually innovate, to push the envelope, to explore and consider what is possible. Coupled with priorities in the strategic planning process, this has the potential to elevate the good we can do to protect our community. I want to make the world a better place, and this is the beginning. I hope you can support this motion.
Councillor Carbone, you wish to second the motion?
Thank you, Your Worship, I do. I am truly honoured to second this motion. Councillor Hubel, truly honoured. This motion comes off the back of a recent global movement where billions have demanded their governments listen and take action. This motion also comes off the back of a speech delivered to the United Nations last night by a young student, similar to the one we had tonight, which will no doubt go down as one of the most memorable speeches of our generation and be known as the How Dare You speech. where she voiced her disgust that governments place money before the environment. That speech, a bit like yours tonight, was historical. And from this day on, any politician, whether you be federal, state, or even right here in local, who places money before the environment will receive the same response. How dare you? To any politician who places a budget surplus or the fear of a rates increase ahead of the environment, or any initiative to boost our tree canopy, I say, how dare you? When I ran for council, I ran for action and not talk. This council can be bold. This council can be brave, and this council can play a leading role in protecting our environment. If this motion is successful, and I hope it is, we will be the first metropolitan council to declare a climate emergency in South Australia, apart from the CBD, metropolitan. This will ensure Burnside Council sets a clear agenda, backed up with a clear action plan, and the environment will be front and centre from now on. We are moving lock, stock and barrel to ensure our world is better for the next generation. We only have one planet, and it's not ours. It's not yours, it's not yours, it's not yours. We have borrowed it from our children and future generations. Whether we are a major polluter or not is not the point. We need to do the right thing, and show leadership on a very important matter. We need to add to the global movement and send our message to the country that Burnside Council does not place the environment second to anything else. It's more important than a budget surplus. It's more important than any potential rate increase. And even if you don't trust the science, which some people on social media over the last week have voiced concern, I say one simple thing, and this is something that no one has been able to debate. Why don't we give Mother Nature the benefit of the doubt? The global movement demands that we declare a climate emergency. The South Australian residents demand we do, and our residents demand we do.
Councillor Hughes.
I wanted to thank Councillor Hubel for presenting this motion this evening, and I did mention to him earlier in the week that I think he's brave by doing it, and he said it's just the right thing to do. So I think this motion that has worked through with the administration really covers off on the key things that as council we need to address. We need to make addressing climate change and the environment a priority in our decision making. It has actions that we can undertake in terms of developing a policy, as well as measuring and monitoring our performance against that. And I think to make a statement is one thing, but to follow it up with actually a plan around how we're going to do that is another thing, and that is why I support the motion. So I thank the community for attending tonight. There's a significant number of people here and a diverse range of our community, which is really pleasing to see. There may not be as many people as we had for the Wheel Park, but I think this is just as exciting as that debate. So I guess one of the contentious issues in this motion is the declaration of an emergency. So what is an emergency? Well, it's a serious, unexpected and often dangerous situation requiring immediate action. So to me, this is something, and I think we've heard it from everyone that's given deputations here tonight, it's something that we just really don't have time to sit back, wait and hope that others will do the right thing for us. So I did want to thank the administration for their work, and I mentioned it in the previous motion, because I think we've all come together to think about how we can be leaders in this space in the city of Burnside. The environment needs to be at the forefront of our decision making as a council, and we need to make informed environmental decisions to make sure we leave the earth in the best possible position for our children and our children's children. And the city of Burnside need to have a strategy in place to take action. We need to measure, create targets and track how we're performing, and I think this motion really covers off on that. There may be some people in the room who are saying that this is just a political statement and it's not the role of local government to be making statements of declarations of a climate emergency. But imagine if everyone in the world thought that it was someone else's job to mitigate climate change. I think we all need to rally together as a group of people that make decisions about our local community and take action. The City of Burnside will be impacted by a changing climate. We all live close to or within fire danger areas within our city, and we need to make sure that we're prepared. That's the role of local government. It's to protect our local area and our residents. I met with a member of the Kensington Park Ward earlier in the year, which led me to ask for the initial report on climate change and what the City of Burnside is doing. So I'd like to share some of Emma's concerns tonight, as she's unable to be here and is travelling for work. She, like me, is a mother of 2 young children, and she says, "I have waited for decades for government to act on climate change. That action has not been forthcoming. We now face a climate emergency. We only have a few years to act until it's too late. The science is in and it is clear. Unless we act urgently, the fate of my children's generation is perilous. By the time my son is 37 and my daughter is 35 in 2050, the world will face extreme food shortages, extreme water shortages, flooding and inundation along the coast, collapse of ecosystems, regular intense disasters and bushfires and floods. The above will result in a breakdown in civilisation as we know it." So she's asked us as leaders in our area and a position where we make decisions about our local community to make a statement about this, to challenge the way that we do things, reduce our carbon emissions and contribute to the global efforts overall. So last Friday, a very good friend of mine attended the climate change strike, and they asked this question: what will you say in 30 years' time when your grandkids are asking, what did you do back then when there was time to take action? And I will look forward to telling them the story that I was a local councillor at the City of Burnside and we took action.
Councillor Davis.
Yeah, I figured you were trying to delay me speak, because you probably have an idea about what I'm going to say. We're saying that we need to take action. We're saying that we need to take a step. Declaring an emergency isn't a step anywhere, and it's definitely not taking any action. Now, my understanding is, and look, there's been a number of different iterations about what exactly we are required to do by a certain amount of time. So how quickly do we need to achieve a certain outcome? That's what I'm interested in. I don't care about telling you that there's an emergency. I don't care about signalling that this is really important to me. What I care about is there a problem, yes or no, and are we going to fix it, yes or no? Now, my understanding, most recent iteration of this, is that if the Paris Agreement is implemented, the 2015, then that will result in a 3-degree rise in the temperature of the Earth by the end of the century. That's apparently not good enough. My understanding is that it needs to be a 1.5% rise to mitigate the most serious impacts of climate change. And in order to achieve a 1.5% rise, 1.5 degree rise by the end of the century, then emissions need to fall by 50% between now and 2030. Now, if you look at the motion, we declare a climate change emergency. But what steps are we taking to decrease, and not just us, it's definitely humans, right? You're emitting. It's a consumption of it. It's really not governments that are emitting, it's population that are emitting. What steps is our population taking to cut its emissions in half by 2030? And that's in 10 years' time. And this motion, to my mind, doesn't achieve that. To my mind, I hope that when we develop a climate change policy, but there needs to be some kind of target here to actually achieve. Otherwise, declaring an emergency, going on protests, doing anything like that doesn't do anything. It's just talking about an issue and it's never actually acting. I don't understand, and I don't think anybody in the world thinks that 800 councils around the world, I think, did you who said that? Yeah, you said that. 800 councils around the world to solve the issue. It doesn't solve the issue. What the thing that politicians do is they say, yes, it's a big emergency, we're taking it seriously and we're doing ABC, and then nothing gets done. And I think that's the criticism of the girl last night. And I think if she was looking at this motion, I'm not sure how happy she would be, actually. would she say that we're going to reduce emissions by 50%? I don't think we should be patting ourselves on the back, and I don't think we should be declaring a climate emergency. In my view, I'm going to support the motion, but I don't think we should declare an emergency because it takes away from what it is. No, because it takes away from what it is. Like, you declare an emergency, you don't do anything. If it's an emergency, you need to act. If it's a crisis, you need to act. So if you declare it and don't do anything, what's the point of doing it? And what governments around the world are doing, declaring emergencies, and then what do? They don't act. So what's the point of it? All it does is it goes, yes, but I declared an emergency. It's a very important issue. I'm just going to wait and see what happens. And so what's the point in declaring an emergency? You're not going to treat it as an emergency. In my view, what an emergency means, and I looked this up on Oxford Dictionary and found that my definition is not right, not even close. But what I would consider to be an emergency is there is a threat and you must make every single resource available, which you can make available in order to deal with that threat. So every resource which can be made available must be made available immediately. That's not happening. It's not going to happen, and it's not going to happen between now and 2030. Governments, in my mind, the lady last night, shouldn't be asking the UN to declare an emergency because it's not going to do anything. She should be asking them to actually take steps and put into place protocols that will actually get you there. Declaring an emergency, in my view, is a way for politicians to go, yes, but I declared an emergency. Look how good a job I did. But what I need to be saying, what I think we should be saying is, how are we going to cut our emissions by 50% between now and 2030, us and our residents, every single resident here and every resident in Australia and then every resident in the globe. And I do liken it to an emergency. And I liken it to an asteroid. What is the difference between an asteroid going to hit the globe in 2030? What would the global response be if you did all the maths and there was an asteroid going to come that's going to hit you? You wouldn't be declaring emergencies, would you? You wouldn't run around telling, you just go and start building space stations and trying to blow the thing up. That's what you would do. You wouldn't go around having rallies and climate change. You just go and get the job done because it's so clear that people are ready to act on it. In my view, we are not ready to act on it in a population. And so declaring emergency makes it dilutes the actual station of how it should be put. So, like I said, I'll support the motion, but hopefully the climate change policy will result in something. Hopefully it will result in a 50% reduction. Well, we'll have to see, but we'll see what that policy is, but I highly doubt it.
Thank you, Councillor Henschke.
I'm just delaying, like Councillor Hughes.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. Well, I'm not going to debate about the definition of an emergency, but I see here 10 hours ago that it's in inverted commas on headlines, so perhaps there's some justification there. But what I'd like to say quickly is that, yes, we're going to have a hotter, wilder, wetter world. What we can do here, the steps, I've been hearing around the table here about what steps are we going to take. Well, this motion here quite clearly says we're going to make decisions about operations, and I imagine that the asset management plans will be looking at the potential for flooding around Tusmore Park, etc., mapping that out. And I'd imagine that also the infill development we're expecting over the next 30 years that the State Planning Commission is going to be rolling out. It's also going to cause peak flooding events through the city of Burnside. All of these things do affect climate change. These are effects of climate change. The infill development, little hot boxes, houses, stack 'em and pack 'em houses in the city of Burnside, make things a bit hotter. And I'd like the residents and ratepayers to continue paying attention to what the State Planning Commission is doing right now, rolling out new planning legislation. So yes, we could only have one tree per block, per house. That's what I read in the paper today. The State Planning Commissioner, the State Planning Commissioner, yes, Mr. Lennon said, yes, we can have one tree per house, everyone. So great stuff there to look forward to in our climate change world. So residents and ratepayers, write to Stephen Marshall. Say you're not happy with one tree, please.
Councillor Davey.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to congratulate Councillor Hubel for a very well thought through and researched motion. I believe it would have taken a fair amount of effort and time to put this together. I won't elaborate. A lot of what I agree with has been said around the table, and we've heard tonight from our community with their views. other than to say, yes, this is the start of the work we need to do. We're, of course, already doing a whole myriad of work throughout the community and throughout our business and the resources that we allocate to mitigation of climate change. But we need to actually pull together a lot of our focus, and I think this will give us some focus and direction and allow us to keep working assiduously to manage this process and to allocate the resources which we'll necessarily have to do to manage this. So I'll be very happy to support it.
Councillor Lemon.
I have had conversations with Councillor Hubel about this before it came up, and one of the things I said to him was there's no point in declaring an emergency unless we've got some stuff underneath it showing that we're actually going to take it seriously. So in many ways, I agree with what Councillor Davis has said. We can declare an emergency, but what does that mean for us? And I will say, but nonetheless, I'm going to support this motion because I think it's important, and I will tell you why I'm going to support this motion because I think it's important. Yes, we will do stuff. We'll do stuff like investigating electric cars for our fleet. We will do stuff like putting solar panels on the roofs so that that's going to create our energy. We're going to use, and Burnside Council has recently signed up with a number of other councils to use recycled products in its infrastructure builds, and I can see those sorts of things increasing over the next 5 years. They will not make a drop in a difference in carbon emissions. Not a drop by us doing that. It'll make us feel good, and it's the right thing to do, but it won't make any difference to the increase in global temperature. However, what will make a difference to the decrease or action in global temperature is that as a grassroots government, and we are the third tier of government, we can in fact stand up and say, no, you're going to take notice. Because what I think is really pathetic is that our current federal government doesn't even have a climate change policy. Now, we can shame them. We're a little council in a little state, 8% of the Australian population. 45,000 people live in this city. We can have a climate change policy. If we can do it, why can't you, Prime Minister? If we can say we're not going to use any energy that's generated by coal, why can't you, Prime Minister? That's what makes this important. It makes it important because we're making that stand because our federal and state politicians are so busy being worried about being re-elected and are so busy about not having policies that can possibly hurt them in their re-election, and are so busy working on an electoral cycle as opposed to working in a bipartisan way over a 10, 15 and 20-year process, which is what this requires. They're so busy doing that we need to show them how it should be done, which is why we need to have this sort of motion and why we need to declare it an emergency. It is not necessarily going to make we're not going to make a lot of difference in Burnside. I don't think you're going to cross Fulton Road and feel that the air is cooler here. Feel that the climate is mitigated here, unless perhaps you get into the pool. But what we can demonstrate is we've got the courage to do this. We are going to focus our efforts on doing what we can within our little city. We've shown you the way. Do something about it, or you will not sit in those places in Parliament for much longer. What has really worried me over a long period of time, and as a South Australian, not just as a Burnside person, but as a South Australian. In South Australia, within the next 10 years, the APY lands in this state will become uninhabitable. And that means that man-made climate change has actually driven traditional owners off their traditional lands. I actually think that that is shameful, utterly shameful, and needs to stop. They won't be able to live there in 10 years' time. but let's keep the lands they can live on as climate sensitive as they can be, so that we can live on them and we can and visit them and have as close an environment as the one we've got right now in the longer term. And we need to do that by example, so I will support this.
Councillor Piggott.
Thank you. This motion to me is excellent and uncontroversial, I feel, with the exception of the first line of point 4. And I do feel it is slightly disappointing, or I do think it's disappointing actually. Councillor Hubel obviously this issue is important to him, and it's good that he has brought it to us. He's lined up a list of strategies and things that we should do, which is extremely good in terms of the action around what's in our powers. And I feel actually on behalf of the residents I represent, there'll be very few of them actually, there'll be some, but there'll be very few actually that would argue against any of them. But the inclusion of the climate emergency, the words climate emergency, has made it political. And so therefore we do have sometimes some rather, people here saying they're not happy with it, but they'll vote with it, and so be it. But I feel actually a better option would be, and if it doesn't get up, I'd suggest someone does put it up, and I'd be happy to, would to be put up the same motion, but without declaring the state of climate emergency. Because that way I feel it would take the vast majority of the people of Burnside with it. This way, I feel it is going to be a discussion over whether it's an emergency, whether it's not an emergency. Is it our job? Is it not our job? I've heard the arguments, and it's not definitive, but the fact is that the words climate emergency have become political. And I feel what we should be doing actually is acting on the report that we received in the last motion in regard to the fact that we're already going down this path. The elements in this motion, apart from the declaration of the emergency, push it a lot more, not perhaps as far as some of the speakers have perhaps said, I don't believe, that's been described as the fact that, it's the number one priority over everything else. I'm not sure it's saying that, but it is saying that it has to be very central to what we do. I don't have a problem with that. I feel that's important. And so I do feel that a motion that just actually did all those great things that Councillor Hubel's got here, but doesn't enter into the political, whether it's an emergency, whether it's not, would actually take the vast majority of the City of Burnside's people. Instead, this will be hammered out as to whether it's an emergency or whether it's not, and I don't think that's appropriate. So, I mean, it's a motion that I wouldn't like to vote down in actual fact, because its sentiment does reflect what I think and what the vast majority of my residents think. I believe in regard to the fact it's important. I don't think that's arguable. But I do believe we would be far better served by something that didn't have the political question being the great debate that will be in next week's messenger. I think we should really focus on what we can do, and the rest of the motion does that. So I'll keep my options open, and I'll hear what Councillor Hubel says in his final speech. But that, to me, I feel is a misstep, and it's disappointing.
Councillor Dawes.
Well, I'm speaking on behalf of my new granddaughter tonight, born yesterday. And I did take what Georgie said to heart, and I saw that Councillor Hughes very much spoke from the heart tonight. Georgie talked about now the children have to fight for their future, and that is so true. And I'm thinking of my new granddaughter, and what sort of world is she going to be going into unless we do something. But I do want to really compliment the 5 speakers. They came from different directions. Corrine, she started off talking about the need for change. Georgie spoke about the children, talked about mass mobilisation, and that we need to be strong in our language. Shrippi, is that she gone? She's gone. Has she? Yeah. She mentioned that time is running out. Actually, I think she'll be a good councillor in 5 years' time, because she'll be 18 by then, I think, I worked out. We need to take solid action now, Burnside City Council. Show, don't tell. I like those words. I haven't heard that been said those ways. And by passing this motion tonight, we are reflecting the need for urgent action. I have to say the comment that got to me the most was the one from David. And David said, the power of example leads to bigger change. And that is so true. You know, so we might be only 1 of 3 or 4 at the moment, but I think we're going to lead it to the next level. And we need to become part of the solution, not wait for the solution. And Kim followed up without any notes. I congratulate you, Kim, with no notes about taking immediate action. So, look, I'm in support of the motion. I think it's been well worded. What I'm pleased about, Phil and Alan, is that we are on the road in that way. So it does answer some of the questions from other councillors as to, you know, what are we doing? We're doing a lot as a council compared to other councils. So I think we need to give ourselves a very, very big tip. But we also, what we are saying to the outside world, that we believe this is a serious issue. Thank you.
Councillor Cornet.
Thank you, Mayor Monceau, and thank you everyone else for speaking as well. Although it hasn't come up directly, it sort of came up during the deputation that some consider that this isn't the role of local government. And that actually jogged me to actually review back to the Act, the six sort of highlighted acts of the principal role of council. The first one is to act as a representative, informed and responsible decision maker in the interests of its community. Our community have spoken. To provide and coordinate various public services, facilities and develop its community resources in a socially just and ecologically sustainable manner. That's item 2. Encourage and develop initiatives within its community for improving the quality of life for the community. Well, we need this, and it needs to continue to happen. That's number 3. To represent the interests of its community to the wider community. That's the big one here. We're advocating. This is what Councillor Dawes has just said. This is what a lot of other people have just said. We are advocating to the wider community that this community here, the city of Burnside, believes that this is an emergency. And I know some people here are scared of that word emergency, but when you're talking about people and cultural change, the change that some of our deputations or deputies tonight have said is required of a societal nature of this magnitude, we are in the state of an emergency. 11 years is not a long period of time to make the significant changes that we need to do as a society to ensure that 100 years from now, people aren't having to live 100 metres underground because the topsoil or the top ground is just, the climate is 300-kilometre winds one day, snow the next day, and scorching earth the day after that. We need emergency, we need action now, and I'm scared completely of the next generation and what we're currently leaving it. I've been on this issue since I was in Year 7 at school. I was scared of this back then, and that's 30 years ago, and I'm very heartened with this motion. Thank you, Councillor Hubel. And I think this will get up. So I will fully support this motion. It is something that we need to do. It is something we need to represent our community for, and I have not had one person come to me and say that we should not do this for our community. And I think everyone will be behind it. So I'm here to declare an emergency for the climate.
Councillor Jones.
I agree with Councillor Piggott and Councillor Davis. So hell has just frozen over, thus negating the climate emergency. The fact is, this is a political statement, and it's an anti-government political statement. That is the point, Councillor Lemon. You are against the government. If you're against the government, run for federal election. For the Green Party or the Socialist Workers' Party, or whoever it is you support.
Councillor Jones, can you just focus on the motion?
Yep.
please?
It's a political statement, it's an anti-government political statement. You may notice that in May this year, we had a federal election. If you listen to the ABC, or you read The Guardian, or you read the Fairfax papers, we were told it was the climate election. And it was the climate election, and the coalition won. The coalition, with their sensible climate change policies, won the election. In my ward of Beaumont, there are two booths, Beaumont booth, Linton Park booth. Over 70% of people at those booths vote for the Liberal Party and the coalition's sensible climate change policies. So I'm quite confident in voting against this motion that I am representing my constituents in Beaumont ward, and you'd have to look at the rest of Burnside. They all voted to re-elect the government as well. So to say that this isn't political is nonsense, with all due respect, Councillor Hughes. Councillor Lemon is right, it is political. I think it's a bad way to go. It's not our job as a council, as a local government, to be criticising the federal government. It's just a bad for policy as for a council to be criticising people with all the power and all the money. Because there have been loony left councils in Melbourne who decided they didn't like Australia Day and they were going to ban citizenship ceremonies on Australia Day. And what did the federal government do? They took their power to hold citizenship ceremonies away. Is that what we want to happen? We have just been promised a grant of $3 million for Kensington Gardens Reserve.
Councillor Jones, can you just stay on the focus on the motion?
No, this is the motion. Here's the point. If you stick two fingers up to the federal government, they may very well stick two fingers back up to you and say, your grant's gone, people. You're on a blacklist.
I know.
How is that not to the motion? We've agreed it's a political statement.
Well, we haven't actually agreed it's a political statement. There are different views.
Well, I have had anti-government groups emailing me asking me to run this motion. Is that not a political statement?
I think let's just focus on this motion that's, as it's worded in front of you.
Yep. So
Focus
I'm
on that
suggesting
as
that,
it's worded,
as
and then we
Councillor
move on.
Piggott has said, declaring a climate emergency is a political thing that is counterproductive to the council. So, is that okay? That's acceptable? That's a line of argument?
That is perfectly fine.
Right. So, that is number one argument against it. Number two, as Councillor Davis says, it's idle posturing. With the Mayor's permission, I will propose a motion without notice after this motion that will demonstrate this is idle posturing, and I will propose an emergency motion in light of the climate emergency that's been declared, that we remove all car parking from council-owned sites to encourage the use of public transport, and with the land saved we plant bamboo plantations, long grasses being the most effective means of carbon sequestration. And I guarantee it will not pass because nobody actually thinks there's an emergency. So that's what I'm proposing, Mayor. I don't think there's any point talking further. This motion is probably going to pass, but I really felt the need to strenuously object to it. Thank you.
Right. Councillor Hubel, back to you. Unless Councillor Turnbull wishes to speak.
Thank you, councillors, for your comments on this issue. I wanted to talk about the idle posturing. I think that the declaration of an emergency is an integral link to the proposals that are listed here. I think declaring a climate emergency is a common language that governments are able to use. It's a statement they can make to say we are like-minded in saying that this is the greatest issue that is before us. In making this the forefront of our strategic plan, that will then be backed up by action plans. There'll be action within those to monitor and develop targets, and we can't have meaningful targets without first thoroughly knowing exactly where we are. And making climate change a key priority within the new strategic plan really opens up a plethora of options of action. I won't speak too much longer. I think everything has really been said. But I do ask that you consider that this is what making a difference looks like. It is not carrying on business as usual. It's standing up, putting this issue front and centre. So, for our future, for our children, for our community, I hope you support this motion.
Those in favour, please raise your hand. Those against? Carried. Oh, a division has been called. So those who are in favour, please stand. I'd like to stand too. Councillor Lemon, Councillor Carbone, Councillor Turnbull, Councillor Dawes, Councillor Hubel, Councillor Henschke, Councillor Cornish, Councillor Hughes, Councillor Davey, Councillor Piggott and Councillor Davis. And those against, Councillor Jones. It is carried. And I'd like to make this comment now. I'm really, really delighted with the attendance from the gallery and the support that you have given. But more importantly, I am so proud of this council. I raised this issue at the ERA meeting last week, and none of the other councils indicated they were going to move in this direction. One was a possibility. And I am really proud that this council is the first in ERA and one of the first in the metropolitan area to take this stand, because if you don't take a stand on something you believe in, then you are going to not do anything about it. And everything we do is political. And if we don't recognise there is a problem, we cannot justify why our staff do all the things, all the fantastic things that we know they already do and will continue to do, because we will direct them in that way. So I really want to say thank you to you all for what I think is one of the proudest moments I've had in my 9 years of council. And can I ask for someone to move that we have a recess now for 10 minutes? Councillor Hughes, Councillor Davey, all those in favour? Thank you. Carried, of course. Well, it's true. I raised it at ERA, and only Campbelltown showed an interest. The others all deflected and said, oh, it's too political, it's only words. Yeah.
lives across the road.
Especially Barry.
No double tapping.
Oh, that? Why not? But people say it. Oh, you came for the big one. And he's 16.
Well done.
those in favour? Thank you. Carried. Right. Now, we need to move to 10.1, which is you, Councillor Piggott.
Well, strangely enough, this deals with another emergency. Something that needs immediate action.
Absolutely.
What is it? Look, what I wanted to, the effect of this this motion changes our rules in regard to the process of finalising the recruitment of the new Chief Executive Officer. Our current rules in the terms of reference have a committee that's in play and the process is actually well advanced. That requires for a committee to provide a recommendation, assuming they can come to a unanimous position, back to this council, one person, and that would then be a motion considered by council as a whole. What this motion does actually is change that process to actually allow the final decision to be made by all of council, having interviewed at least 2 interviewees and before the final decision is made. That's the impact of the motion. And the reason I'm raising it is twofold, actually. To be honest, I'm now on the CEO committee, as you're aware, but when I was not on it, I did feel as an elected member I'd really like to be part of the final decision. Not through any lack of faith of the committee as such. It's just such a big and important decision. The CEO is an important element in the council, and particularly in regard to we as elected members. So that was one reason. That was a purely selfish reason. And then the second reason I feel is the fact that I think it would benefit, actually, if we were, as a group, making the final decision. It would provide us all to have a real buy-in to that final decision. And so from that point of view, I feel it's actually got benefits that the process from here would be that the committee do...
We don't have a presiding member.
Sorry, I'm just...
Oh, you are there, Jesus. You scared the crap out of me. Sorry, keep going.
Sorry.
Sorry, it was very
right.
good.
Yeah. Perhaps I can have an extension in time to collect my thoughts. No, it's fine. No, we just suddenly lost you, actually. I wasn't sure where you were either. Right, so, okay. The process under this process would be that, as you know, the ad has gone out. The committee would actually interview a short list of candidates and provide the preferred 2, or, I've put there a minimum of 2, just in case that the committee feels that perhaps there should be more than that come to council for the final selection process. And then the final selection process would be all of council, or at least a quorum of council, but ideally all of council, interview the ones that have got down to that level or got up to that level, and the decision is made by all of council in that process. It's an interesting issue, actually. I feel that is the way to go. I don't wish to sell it hard. I think we should all consider it as to whether it is the right way to go. I think it has significant benefits. I don't think it has too many downsides. The process can allow it to happen, and so I feel that we should vote the motion up.
Councillor Davis, you wish to second it?
Yes. This motion, and I apologise to Councillor Piggott for the interruption. This motion shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody, because this is exactly what Councillor Piggott, his concern, I expressed when we were selecting the CEO committee, and I said then that I hoped that the CEO committee would resolve in this way, or that this exact motion would come to council. Probably should have moved it myself. I'm not on the CEO Performance Appraisal Committee, and in my view, the appointment of the Chief Executive Officer is the most important decision we will ever make in our entire 4-year term. It underpins everything that we do. It underpins every interaction that we have with the administration. It underpins every single decision which is made by the administration in the City of Burnside, and it matters so much to everything. And so personally, I feel that I want to have a say, and I want to have a vote on who becomes our next CEO. To me, that decision is vital in terms of my responsibility. And I think that we have some good people on the CEO committee. My understanding is that if it's not unanimous, then it comes back to council. But at the same time, I feel that it should be my decision to make, and I don't want to place that into somebody else's hands necessarily, notwithstanding the fact that the CEO Performance Committee will probably make the right decision, I suppose, or come to a decision. I would feel far more comfortable knowing who the candidates are, and I would have so much more confidence in whoever becomes the CEO, that they are the CEO and I've chosen them or had a process or a part in the process for them becoming the CEO. And to my mind, if I don't participate in that process, it's hard for me to say they're my CEO because I never put them there. And to my mind, the decision of council, it should go through that process in terms of electing not just the final recommendation from the appraisal committee. I would like to see who the candidates are. I really do like the fact that you would narrow it, and I think that work is really important. Definitely don't want to, I think that kind of task is better for a smaller group to do. But the reason why we have 13 people sitting around this room is about the notion of collective decision making, and the more people generally that you have in a decision, the better the outcome. Generally, dictators make poor decisions, and the more people that are involved in a decision making process, the better the outcome. And you need to weigh that with the administrative burden of doing that. So if you imagine in federal parliament, every single person making every single decision would be a nightmare. But in this case, this is the one decision, the most important decision that we will ever make, and I would feel very much left out, and I would feel it hard to buy into whoever would be the CEO if I wasn't a part of that process, which I think is integral. And so I hope that you support this. It shouldn't come as a surprise. It's something I've expressed before, and perhaps many of you think that way. But for those of you on the committee at the moment, you probably have that. I'd ask you to think about people who are sitting outside of it, and hopefully you will support that, even though you get to be part of that process. And I hope that you can see the merit in me being part of that process as well. So I hope that you support this.
Councillor Jones.
I have to say I'm in two minds on this one. I think Councillor Piggott and Councillor Davis raise strong arguments, and I can see why everybody would like to be involved in choosing the CEO, because I agree with Councillor Davis, it probably will be the most important decision we take. I'll put a counter argument that I suggested to Councillor Piggott, and maybe we can discuss it and then see what we come up with. But I would say the reason that it goes to a committee, and this is not just a City of Burnside thing, it happens in companies and organisations everywhere, is they say, committee, go away and come up with a candidate you can all agree with. And then we'll put it forward, and then the council as a whole does have a right of veto. I think the danger of this proposal is, and Councillor Davis said, not my CEO, is if you go to a committee and say, come up with a unanimous recommendation, or it's open season on the council, it comes to the council with two candidates, and you could have somebody elected, say, by 7-6. And you could have 7 people love the successful person and 6 people loathe them, and it's potentially not a very auspicious start for a new CEO, where 6 people can say, not my CEO. So I put that as a counter view, and maybe people can decide what they think is the best way forward.
Councillor Carper.
Your Worship, question to you as chair of this committee. So the way I see this playing out is you shortlist potentially 2 candidates. Both candidates would come to a workshop with the whole of council, and there'd be an interview. I'm just wondering, just to make this effective, would each candidate be asked to maybe make a presentation or something on what they would do as CEO or something like that, rather than just rock up and 13 random questions? would there be some structure to it?
There would have to be some structure, as there already is a structure to what is planned for the first stage. And that structure we may be advised by our recruitment company, or it may be part of a decision making of our committee, or working with the recruitment company as their advisor, or we make a decision ourselves. But it couldn't be a random come in and talk. It would have to be a purpose, a direction, and given to the candidates if that were to be the case.
I only asked because it wasn't clear, but...
Hopefully I haven't confused anybody any further.
That's good.
Councillor Davey?
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. I have a question. Can someone remind me of the timelines that we're working to? I know we reviewed them recently and updated them. When do we expect, if we're getting applications now?
It's possible the end of October. I can't be more specific with a date than that. Sorry, Councillor Cornish. Apologies, you're looking at me and I'm not looking at the screen.
I'm not making doe eyes at you, Mayor Monso. I'm similar to Councillor Jones with this one, a little bit of two minds, but at this present moment, I think I would be supportive of the motion as it stands. And the only real reason that I sort of will go there, and I do understand the complexities of the vote, and perhaps it would be about how a whole chamber of 13 people do vote, that they would have to actually take in consideration the concerns that Councillor Jones has actually raised in terms of when that does occur. But I'd try and put myself in the shoes if I was on the outside. I'm currently on the committee, and whether or not the next 3 odd years my go-to comment would be, well, I didn't pick him.
Or her.
Or her, yes, sorry. No. We've been doing that in committee all time too, so we've always been dropping that or her. But look, I would say that would be a fairly big fear for me. And I understand that, in most organisations, happens in mine as well. You get a committee, they make a recommendation, but usually it's one person that signs that off and approves it. It's not a group of people, and I think you do need a buy-in from a group of people in the successful candidate. So I actually think it's probably a good change for the long term for this committee. To have almost a 3-stage process for this. So I will be supportive of it at this stage.
Councillor Lemon?
I, on the other hand, am not supportive of it at all, in any way whatsoever, for all the reasons that both Councillor Jones and Councillor Cornish have mentioned, but I certainly have my own reasons for this, and I want to talk about process. In November, we voted to put people on the committee, and I didn't notice either Councillor Piggott or Councillor Davis's hand go up for that at all. But then it got interesting, and we found ourselves in a situation where we need to find a CEO. So instead of moving along with the normal appraisal, we're suddenly in a situation where we need a CEO. We've had 3 motions from Councillor Piggott on this matter. The first, and I am 3 motions. The first motion tied us to a timeline of his choosing, which we all went along with, and I didn't really think about it much at the time. But in effect, pondering this particular motion, in effect, I've thought back on that, and what was being said was, Councillor Piggott had no faith, and he said there's no lack of faith, but, we've got 3 motions now that show that there seriously is a lack of faith. No lack of faith in the committee. Well, there was no faith in the committee being able to get onto it in a timely fashion. We had to have a resolution from council holding us to a time frame, which we're not keeping, on the understanding with the underpinning idea that we're a mob of slackers, that we're going to get to it in the fullness of time, which wasn't going to suit anyone else. Not true. We'd met several times prior to that, and we were well and truly aware of the fact that this had to be done in a timely fashion. So seriously, that first motion was an insult to our capacity to actually do things in a timely fashion. The second motion said, well, we need another 2 people on that. And what it really said to me was Councillor Piggott wanted to be on the committee, which he almost didn't make. It was only the luck of the draw that put him there in the end. I actually think that insulted the 4 members of the committee. We were, in fact, working as a functional body. We were moving through the work that had to be done. And I must say, we are all very, very different people. The people on that committee currently are the presiding member, the Mayor, Councillor Dawes, me, Councillor Cornish. Now, all of us, very, very different. Very, very different people, very strong people, very opinionated people. And we've moved forward with consensus. And yet, motion number 2 said, no, 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 these 4 people aren't near good enough. We need an extra 2 to help them along. Prior to that, this committee had gender balance and a great deal of diversity in it. Now we've got an extra 2 people that have come in that, from my point of view, I don't mind them being there, but I don't think they make the process better. I don't think they make the process worse. They're just an extra 2 people. They make the process longer because there's an extra 2 people that speak. I think without them, we would still be at the point that we are now. Now, we've got this motion that presupposes that the committee's going to come to a consensus decision. Now, think about the 4 people that are on that committee. It presupposes we're going to come to a consensus decision and this is not going to come back to council. And if it did come to a consensus decision, think about the 4 people that are on there. If it did come to a consensus decision, is it the right person in that job? And then it comes back to council and you don't have to take our word for it. You can say, no, actually, we want you to go back and do it again, or we want this. We don't need this motion right now. All I can see right now is I'm deeply offended at the slur that's been cast on this committee from motion number 1. I'm deeply offended because what I can see is somebody, father knows best, white male privilege, that is stuck on the red cape and is coming in to save the world. And I don't think the world needs saving. I really don't. So I want you to consider whether this is purity of motion or being meddlesome. Whether this is actually trusting the committee that this whole council voted for last November, or whether, now that something bright and shiny has come along to play with, somebody else wants to be involved. So this is the final thing. Think about the purity of the motion and keep in mind Superman is actually a cartoon character.
Councillor Dawes.
Oh, thank you, Mayor, and a lot of what Councillor Lemon just said I agree with. Probably not in the same tone, but you know what I mean. Yes. Again, just to remind people, the 7 members of council were not on this committee, that if we are unanimous in our decision, the 6 of us, then we'll recommend a suitable candidate. I want everybody to understand that. If it's not unanimous, then we'll do a short list. It could be 2 or 3, hopefully 2. If one of the candidates is outstanding, I don't know if that's true or false, it's a no-brainer from our point of view, then we put that candidate forward. Now, we now have a committee of 6, as Councillor Lemon has said. It's got a good balance of newly elected and re-elected members. Hasn't quite got the gender balance of the 4 of us, but still got both male and female members on it. And as Councillor Lemon said, we come from a variety of backgrounds, that is definitely true, and work experiences involving executive roles. So we all have a different point of view. In July, as Councillor Pickett said, it was first considered to extend the committee. I was away on leave at the time. And then 2 months later, we got another change. I just wonder if those two were put together back in July, I don't know if that motion would have gone through, but that's a query I have. It looks to me like policy on the run. It really does. So what's changed since July? And I just want to repeat a little bit of what Councillor Lemon said. There has been robust debate amongst the six of us, and the six of us would agree with that. Whether it be the choice of the recruitment firm, whether it was the wording in the advertisement, whether it was the position description, or most recently the questions we'd asked for the first interviews. We really all had a say. But when you read the minutes, there was a consensus and it was agreed unanimously. There wasn't one motion since I've been on the committee where we haven't agreed unanimously. I can't remember one we haven't agreed unanimously.
But it's not speaking to the motion. Like, it's not about the performance of the committee. It's about whether it should be here. So it's not relevant whether the committee functions well. What matters is who gets to vote and whether the CEO is there. So I don't think what Councillor Law is saying is relevant. Saying what Councillor Lennon before.
I'm going to allow them to finish. And if when Councillor Pickett sums up, you can challenge the issues.
You can allow them to finish, but I'm saying it's not relevant. So I'd ask you to direct the member to the motion.
Personally, I think they are relevant, and I think it's important that all of the elected members around the room hear what processes have gone through already, and I think that's relevant to hear. But no, I know it's not a criticism of the process. Okay, so I'm going to leave it to Councillor Pickett to argue that when he comes to summing up. Councillor Dawes, do you wish to continue in that mode when you can see that there are some objections?
Yes. Thank you, Mayor. The relevance to us is that this committee, I believe, has got the right people on it to either choose one outstanding candidate or to choose at least two and to go through that process. So we don't need to change the terms of reference as the motion has been put forward. Please have faith in the six of us to come up with the right people or person. Thank you.
Councillor Turnbull.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree also with Councillor Lemon. I have complete faith in this committee. We voted them on. We voted for two more, which I was against actually, because I thought a smaller group, working group, would have been more efficient. And we have a group of people charged with this decision. They've dedicated a lot of time and effort, have a good knowledge of the situation. I can't see why it would be better for the whole council to be involved, and I'm quite happy with it. And surely we're mature enough to say, okay, I didn't vote for this CEO, and I don't really like him, but we'll go along with it. We need to be mature enough to get over it. Oh, yes, yes. So I won't be supporting this motion. Thank you.
Sorry.
Councillor Hughes.
I did have a question. I just wanted to clarify something that Councillor Dawes said. So if the current CEO committee do not agree, what is the process? Then we would then get two people or a number or shortlisted.
The terms of reference clearly state that if there is not a complete consensus from the entire committee, which has raised the chances in greater, there was 4, now there's 6 that have to all agree. If we do not all agree to the consensus, then we will be bringing at least 2 to the whole council for a decision. That is what the current terms of reference state.
Okay. I'll speak very briefly. I'm sitting on the fence in some respects. I can see both sides. I'm willing to listen to debate and be swayed. I think my personal experience over the last 10 months, if we can get those 6 people to agree, it's probably going to be one of the better candidates that are put forward. I think there's a good mix personally of personalities and opinions. And I do believe that there is a good cross section, and I think the argument that there is a risk of people saying I didn't vote for that person, that's not my choice. Well, there are lots of decisions that we make over the course of 4 years that I didn't agree with. You know, we inherited things that last council made. I didn't vote for that, but we go with it. And I am on the fence, but I'm probably leaning towards a certain side at the moment. But I'll see how it plays out. You can convince me still.
Councillor Henschke.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. Well, look, I've heard tonight that we have picked leaders, our search leaders in this committee, and I put absolute trust and faith, and they've earned their trust, earned their respect on their committee over the last few months. So I'm very confident that our committee will continue to provide their skills in finding the right CEO. I'm really concerned that, you know, as a council, we seem to change our minds all the time, and this is unstable. I've seen this happening with budgets already this year, where we had an annual business plan, we set off on a path for the budget, and we're starting to change things. Same principle is happening here. We're looking unstable here. It's not a way to run a business or a council. We appointed some leaders, search leaders, in good faith, and we planned. They know exactly what to do, and now they're executing that plan. So let's continue with that. Otherwise, we really have unpredictability in this space, and I'm very uncomfortable with that. Thank you.
Don't have anyone else on the screen, so Councillor Piggott, it's back to you.
Thank you. Look, sorry?
They're playing a dirge upstairs.
Oh, are they?
Sorry.
Look, it's a shame this wasn't raised as in any way a reflection on the current committee, of which I am a member. It was really raised because I think it's important that all council have a crack at that final decision. It really comes from that. I mean, it has turned into Councillor Lemon and Councillor Dawes, I've clearly upset in some of the changes I have sought. And look, I would concede that of the 3 motions I have run, the first 2 were based on frustration with the committee as it was at the time. We had at that point, I think, travelled a couple of months since we'd dismissed the previous CEO, and I was concerned about the makeup of that committee of those 4 people. I concede that. I probably said at the time I wasn't. Perhaps that was a bit of a cover, but you know, given that it's been thrown at me tonight, I think it's probably right that I do fess up to the fact that I was frustrated at the time. We had received nothing as a wider council in regard to what was going on. We'd had 2 months travel down the track, and I thought it was important to perhaps put a couple more elements into the committee, and B, get a timeline. I put a perhaps impossible deadline on it, but the idea was to actually get a timeline that the committee worked to, and that has happened. And I think actually both of those have actually worked well. So, and look, I apologise. I clearly have upset people, perhaps even more now, by actually saying it is true what you thought. That's where those 2 came from. This one doesn't come from there though, and that's why Councillor Dawes talking about how good the current committee is. That's not really the point. The point is, what is the best mechanism to make the decision in order to make a very important decision that affects us all? And it's very personal. It'll ultimately be very personal to us all, because we'll all work with this person. What is the best mechanism? Now, we can leave it with the committee, and it could come back anyway if those 6 people can't agree unanimously. It could, but I just don't think we should leave it to chance. I really do think it's a decision that should be made by all of council, having looked at more than just one that gets delivered to them. And that's really the decision. I don't think it should be we're not looking unstable. In fact, I feel that the fact that we do question our processes to make sure we get them absolute best is something we should be applauded for. We're not looking unstable. And I don't think we should get mixed up on whether I am constantly having a crack at the committee by trying to change the rules. In this case, I am not. All I'm saying is the best way to do this, I think, is with all council. The committee will get it down to a very short list, and council then would have the final decision. There would be Councillor Carbone, good question. I don't think I'm in a position to say how it would work, which is why I didn't put it in the motion. But as I would see it, is there would be some sort of presentation process, agreed questions ahead of time. You know, it would need to be formalised, as any interview process is. So I think that's where we should decide. I don't think we should worry about whether it's casting aspersions on the current committee, because it isn't. We shouldn't be worried about that it's another change, so therefore it's unstable. That is not a good argument. What we need to give our thought to is, and particularly, no, what you need to give your thought to is, which is the better way to do it? Is it beneficial to have formalised a process where this whole group actually saw presentations, had an interview with the last 2 candidates and made the decision as a group? Because I think it is the right way to go. And I seek your support on the motion.
Right, those in favour? Those against? Motion is lost. Right, we move on to verges. Councillor Cornish.
Thank you, Mayor Monso. Yes, I circulated an email just to give a bit of an explanation of what this motion is seeking to do, as I received a few queries of it. I'm pretty certain it's just seeking a report to ask how we can incorporate it. This is one of those small things that I think Councillor Hubel sort of motion about if we had a sort of a greening or, you know, urban canopy directing sort of overlay over everything we do, it would automatically be picked up. But this is a little a gap in the service that I thought that we should try and alleviate. We've had a bit of money of a windfall from the new footpaths as well. Obviously not being rolled out the way that they are, and whether or not, you know, a couple of these every year could potentially be sort of managed or fixed up so we can have more trees in our verges. So I hope you support the motion to see how this can happen, and I put it to the floor.
Seconder, please. Councillor Hughes.
I'm happy to second the motion, and I do not wish to speak.
Councillor Davey.
I just have a quick question. I fully support the intent of the motion. I just wondered if we could have a bit of a description about how it might work. I mean, I know the report will detail that, but how this idea, it's essentially reclaiming some land that's currently paved, as I understand it.
Through the chair, without having looked at this in detail yet, I think the intent would be to have someone go around, do an audit of all the verges to identify those spots that were potentially eligible, and then we'd have to look at a consultation with that particular homeowner to confirm that they're not used or don't have plans to be used, those crossovers, and then assuming that that's the case, we'd then be looking at some works to amend those particular situations we could find to remove the disused crossover and to look at additional tree planting if there was sufficient room to do so.
Just a follow-up question, sorry, I know. Is this, because it seems to be this the way our planning decisions have gone in terms of allowing crossovers that are adjacent. Does this mean a review of those sort of decisions, or does it impact on those sort of decisions?
Through the chair, this is sort of the opposite of that. So this is disused crossovers. So they're crossovers that were at one stage used and were obviously approved for that purpose, but then over time have become disused. So for whatever reason, people have taken out a driveway, or whatever the reason, I may have put in a second one perhaps.
Councillor Henschke.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. Just going to the specific example on Stewart Road that Councillor Cornish emailed us today. When the street was repaved, that was just done recently, was the resident asked whether they needed that crossover. Was it a wheelchair access or something? And I'm just assuming that questions are asked like that when we go about paving.
Through the chair, I believe, and I would have to double check on this because obviously didn't undertake those works personally. When that paving job started, they were looking at paving like for like because there is an access gate that falls behind that particular crossover. We did receive a complaint at that point in time saying it was a waste of money to pave that particular area. It is actually more costly to return it to a curb and remove that area of paving. I would have to confirm whether we spoke to the residents to confirm whether they needed that or not. I believe we did, but I'd have to confirm that.
Yeah, no, that's all right. Thank you. Just, it's... and could this just be broadened out to, you know, creating, I mean, the intent's great, to support the canopy action plan, and so sometimes when you're in a street you might see a tree that's not in a verge, but the tree is in the bitumen. Have you seen those? You know, so we've got some streets with trees in the bitumen, so would this mean we'd be putting a bit of verge around those trees as well? Is that what we could cover with this, or not?
Through the chair, at this stage, that resolution is not covering those particular situations.
Okay, because I'm not sure if that's what Councillor Cornish was trying to cover as well.
Yeah, I'm happy to sort of, I suppose, sum up a little bit. No, it was specifically a very small program. I doubt you'd get many of them, but, you know, and I can understand it is more costly to restore a curb, but I think of a tree that will be there for 80 years and how much benefit that's actually going to be providing, and the cost benefit for having a tree in that spot of the verge, to me, is a better cost benefit than us just paving that same spot, because at the time of doing the paving it was more cost effective to cover a disused, unneeded crossover than to actually plant a tree for generations to come. So it's a very small program. I'm not expecting many of them. We might not have to do an audit. It might just be people identify and let people know about it. You know, I'm not expecting it, but we need to be able to actually return verges back to the urban canopy.
Those in favour? Those against? Carried unanimously. Moving to 10.4. Sorry, 10.4, Councillor Piggott.
As long as it's a big bylaw, a complete bylaw.
Okay. Well, what I'm asking for here is this motion really reflects the fact that we do have a number of cat related issues, particularly in Skye, but not just in Skye, across a number of spots on the foothills. There are issues in regard to feral cats and also wandering domestic cats. And the council does do quite a lot. I asked the question on notice. You'll see if you read that in terms of what the current situation is with cats. And there's a number of things at play that administration this came up initially from residents in Skye, and then when you talk to spoken to Martin, and it is an issue that needs addressing and would probably benefit from a bylaw. We do have people who have got more cats in a residential location than is healthy. We've got people feeding wandering cats. We've got cats out at night, which will be doing significant damage, potentially, or damage to our wildlife. So we've got a number of issues around cats. The change of law now required domestic cats to be microchipped at 3 months, I believe, and that allows us, gives us the ability to understand who a cat belongs to. So what this is asking for really is a report around what we might put into a bylaw to assist council. It gives us, or gives council, some legal responses that it currently doesn't have. So straight off the bat, I'm not saying we're having a bylaw, but certainly on initial look, it would have a few things in the bylaw, if we got it right, that would allow us to allow administration to manage the cat problem that we currently do have. So I'm seeking a report that we could look at it in some detail and decide what we want to do.
Councillor Davey, you're seconding?
Yes, I'm happy to second it, thanks. And I have a question first. Does this request, if it is resolved by council, would this include an assessment of educational processes and promotion of cat management and preventing cats wandering? Would that be the intention?
Through the chair, yes, happy to take that on board with the report.
Thank you. Yes, I'll speak to it. I mean, this supports our dog and cat management policy, which actually one section of it includes reduce the number of cats wandering at large, and the measures to help assist this that council promote the keeping of cats inside at night, promote containment of cats on owners' property, and educate and inform the community regarding the benefits of containment of cats on owners' property. I commend Councillor Piggott for his motion. I and many of my constituents have long believed that we need to have better management of cats in the city of Burnside. As an animal lover, I keep my dogs exercised and on my property. They don't wander and annoy people. We have a very small percentage of dogs that do that, and they are dealt with. But we need to ensure that as far as we can, that our owned and much loved cats are kept in their home or provided with an enclosure. This keeps them safe as much as Councillor Piggott has said, with the local birds and wildlife. Those cats which are not owned or which are feral need to be controlled and removed from our Hills Face zone in particular, to protect our wildlife and to protect the cats, to protect the community from their behaviour. And I believe council would benefit from a cat bylaw which will address this and provide information and support to residents along the way, and also for our remaining birds and wildlife to give them some protection. But the new policy allows for this, and I think in terms of the opportunities this provides, I think this is a very worthwhile report. So I hope you'll support it.
Councillor Davis?
I'll support the motion, but I'd like to express a contrary view, I think. So I have residents in Skye as well, and I've actually spoken to them about how we should deal with cats, and I put it to them that there are steps we can take that will make things so much worse than they are at the moment. And it's a bit of a counterintuitive view, and I spoke about this 5 years ago when it first came to council. And I did a lot of research into it then, actually. I read PhDs. That's the most I've ever researched a motion. Since then, I've never read a PhD. But there's the estimates of feral cats in Australia between 5 to 23 million. And the feral cat estimation, I think it was Greg Hunt estimated they kill about 20 billion animals in Australia. You know, they can be rats and mice, but also native animals as well. And so feral cats in Australia do a huge amount of harm. The other complicating fact, and something I'd like to point out to you, is that cats are territorial in that they control territories, just like you saw in The Lion King. They have, everything the light touches, that's their pride. And it's the same thing with your household cat, in fact, that they have territories. The bigger, the meaner the cat, the bigger the territory. The smaller, the scared of the wimpier cat, the smaller the territory, and yet they eat the same amount of food. They each eat about 300 grams of food a day. Something to consider when this report comes out, and I want to try and colour your view when you look at this objectively, is don't just go, yes, we are doing something, because the alternative thing, and this is incumbent on the administration as well, is to look at the knock-on effects. So if you say reduce, if you say let's keep cats indoors at night, well, actually what studies have shown is that cats actually have, where there's a lot of cats in a small amount of region, is they'll take timeshare of their territories, which means during the day, cat A will get control of the territory, and during the night, cat B will get control of the territory. Now, what I'm suggesting to you is something to think about, and I'm going to support the motion because I'm very interested to know what will come out of it. But if you take the household cat that's being fed and doesn't necessarily have as great a need to hunt out from the nighttime shift, that could potentially allow a feral cat, which is then hunting during that period, then into that territory. So what I've actually said to my residents in Skye, and they've asked me to do something, and I said, to be honest with you, the biggest, meanest cat that pees on everything and bullies all the cats out of the area, and the one that is meowing your front door, that's the one you might want. Because the alternative is you don't see them, is they don't fight, that they don't mark a territory, and you have more cats in a smaller area. So I'd like to see what the recommendation is, but we can take action that might seem like we're doing things, but actually has the exact opposite effect. And in my view, the only way to stop feral cats in Australia is to develop a virus like the Khaleesi virus and wipe them out. And that would kill every household cat. And for public policy reasons, it's just never going to happen. Now when you say, okay, well, we got rid of one cat in Skye, there are 23 million other feral cats in the Australian bush which are looking for larger territories. So I urge caution when you look at the report that comes up, and I support it, but don't just go, yes, we're taking action, yes, this will solve the problem, because it might not. It's incumbent upon the administration to look deeply at this issue and look at, there are studies, there are people who do this full time, looking at this huge problem to the Australian, Australian bush and the animals, the native animals here. There's a huge amount of animals in the bush which are currently being threatened to extinction by cats which are being introduced. We might make things worse, just in our small patch, just something to consider for future.
Councillor Lemon?
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions, if I may. And the first is, those properties in Skye, there's 2 properties in Skye that are feeding cats. Have they been the ones that have been feeding cats for the last 10 years, or are they different ones? Have we got newbies?
Through the chair, one of those certainly is.
So it's the same little old lady that's still feeding the cats?
Correct, yeah.
So that's my first question, thank you very much. So whilst we've been monitoring this for a while, it hasn't actually changed that much. It's gone in greater or lesser degrees? Okay. And the second question is, I note that council provides cat cages to residents that ring up and ask. I've known this for a while, and I've not asked this question, but I'd like to ask this question. Do we monitor what happens to those cats when they're caught? And the reason I ask this is, often people that are prepared to use a cat cage are also people that are prepared to be cruel to cats. Are we taking responsibility for that in any way? Magnus?
Through the chair, starting from look, we won't necessarily know what happens to every cat that's caught. There's no way we can know. Certainly if a cat is trapped and we're alerted, we'll go and get the cat. And we know that there are a couple of people, including the original landowner's son, that are trapping cats and then sending them to a vet. So for the most part, cats are being taken to an appropriate place, but we've got no way of knowing if 100% of cats are being taken to an appropriate place.
Can I do a follow-up, may I? So if you put out 10 cages, for instance, to owners, and you get 8 of those cages come back with a trapped cat, and 2 don't, and you know where they are, do you then ask those people, did you not trap a cat? Is there any follow-up, I guess, is what I'm saying, for those cages that tend not to come back, go to the vet, do this or do that?
Through the chair, we do keep in contact with the people who have cages, but and there are some that have had cages and we've had little or have no information about what's happened, whether they've even caught a cat or not. So again, I mean, there's probably no absolute way of knowing that no cat has been disposed of. That is an entirely a possibility, but we're confident that most cats, if they're caught or trapped, are being taken to a vet and possibly to the AWL after that.
Thank you. I'll speak to the motion now, if I may. I thank Councillor Davis for his very well researched answer and comments and I think that perhaps if you still have the material you might like to pass it on to administration as they may have to provide information background for a bylaw. I will support this because I think getting a report back is a good thing, but one of the issues that I've always had problems with when we start talking about cats and when we start talking about having bylaws for cats is this. Cat owners that love their pets will keep their pets in at night because in the first instance they don't want their cats to be run over, but mostly there's a lot of cat haters in this world, and if they come across a cat they will be cruel. Cats disappear often. And I think that if we start looking at cat control measures, we have to do it very, very carefully because I want to make sure that we don't give rein to cat haters to treat cats badly because I would feel very, very bad about that. It would distress me enormously. And when we've talked about this at previous councils, I've had flurries of calls from people talking about their neighbours who are cat haters and the viciousness that goes on with people that have such great loathing of cats and even those ones that never step out of their houses are equally loathed by neighbours. And I think we need to be mindful of that all the time. It's a huge thing and I would like administration to keep that in mind as they develop this.
Councillor Davey?
Yes, I just have a question. Councillor Lemon raised some very pertinent points. Do we know what other councils do in terms of cat management and cat disposal? I noticed there are a whole lot of advertisements at the moment for councils reviewing their bylaws, cat bylaws and cat legislation, so I wonder if there's already in place some measures to manage the issues that have just been raised that we could perhaps consider in our report?
Through the chair, there are a growing number of councils who have developed or are developing a cat bylaw. They're not necessarily all consistent. For example, a cat bylaw may introduce a system of registration, it may not. If it does, it may have a charge associated with that, it may not. Does it have a curfew or does it have, as with the Adelaide Hills Council, I think a permanent confinement rule, which is the cat's not allowed off your property at any time. So there's no. I think the LGA does have a template, but it hasn't been universally applied equally across the board. In terms of the disposal of cats, I can imagine that we can explore this in the report, but cats that are taken to the vet are assessed by the vet as being either able to be rehomed or not. Cats that are able to be rehomed are sent to the AWL.
Councillor Henschke.
Thank you, Mayor. So I've learnt that the Mount Barker Council's working on bylaws and, limiting 2 cats per property and fines and so forth. It sounds like they've got a really big problem up there in Mount Barker. So how big is our problem here in the city of Burnside? Have we got a sense of the problem here?
Through the chair, it's always difficult to get a real handle on the problem. We know we do have a particular problem with the feral cats, or ones that don't associate with humans or not owned, in particular in our foothills area, such as Skye. That seems to be the biggest problem, although that's not to say that there aren't other little isolated pockets of complaint. Every now and again we do have people complaining in our more established suburbs about cats, but particularly at the moment the feral cat population seems to be the biggest issue that we're trying to deal with.
Okay, thank you.
Right, Councillor Piggott, back to you.
Thank you for all that discussion, and I think it does prompt the fact that it is worth a report. It doesn't. The answer is going to be complex, I suspect, but I feel it's definitely worthwhile. The issue is large enough to warrant the report, so I seek your support.
Those in favour? Those against? Carried unanimously. 10.5, Councillor Cornish again.
Thank you, Mayor Monceau. I won't labour on the point. You've all probably read the motion that I wish to prepare to go to the Local Government Association. I have not done this in isolation. I have spoken on numerous occasions with council staff here and with staff in the Local Government Association as well, to make sure that there's a need. It's sort of becoming a little bit glaringly obvious, from communications or questions that we were asking at the last council meeting. Also regarding just making sure that we're prepared for some of the new materials that are going to be coming into the circular economy. A tonload of house batteries, a tonload of car batteries, they don't make the tip. You use them for another 10 years afterwards. How are we planning for that? How are we going to repurpose them? How are we going to use them again? We should do this as a planned approach. The state government can step in. It's not just Burnside. Let's raise this to the next level, and the LGA, they should have an expert panel that actually directs a bit more industry involvement and comes up with some supply and demand for particular products, not just for councils, but it could be for the public in general. So I hope you support this motion, that the LGA might have a look at this, and this is us advocating up on behalf of our community.
Councillor Lemon, you wish to second it?
Yes, thank you very much, Councillor Cornish. I think this is very timely, particularly given that we've got an emergency. I think waste is one of those things that we need to deal with in that, so I'm very happy to support this.
Councillor Henschke.
Oh, thank you. I was going to try and second it, so that's all right. Thank you. Nothing more to be said. Thank you.
Councillor Davey.
I'm the same, so nothing further to add.
I'm glad we've got a lot of keen people. I don't have anyone else. Put it. Right, those in favour? Those against? Carried unanimously. The next one is mine, and the reason I've moved it is because back in 2014 I initiated a motion that came to council because I was particularly concerned about accidents that were happening on the freeway. Living on Mount Osmond, I use that freeway sometimes 3, even 4 times a day, and thousands of cars are using that freeway as a means of getting to work and to jobs and to schools, and they daily encounter issues to do with larger vehicle traffic. On 2 occasions, our previous CEO wrote to the Deputy and the Minister in relation, and those letters were provided to you as well. When I was contacted week before last, by the ABC Radio and the Advertiser, the question that they asked me first was, has Burnside Council ever written or expressed concern to Deputy or the Minister about the issues to do with the intersection and the large transport? My answer was yes, and we were able to give them a quote from those letters. And we now have a new minister that we haven't sent an email to, and since that near tragedy, 10 days or so ago, the Minister has indicated he wants to hear from people with concerns, hence my motion that I've put here. And last night I was also pointed out, in fact in the early hours this morning, there was nearly another tragedy on the freeway where a B-double lost control and was videotaped by a car following, nearly lost control and would have taken out a number of cars as well. The issue continues, and I just wish that, hopefully someone will second it and will support this, writing again to the Minister about our concerns. We share with 2 other councils that intersection, and we have been the only one proactive, as I'm aware, proactive in our concerns about accidents and deaths. There have been 3, there have been 4, and that is 4 too many. And I don't want to be there sitting at the traffic lights as an innocent potential victim waiting for a semi-trailer to come boring down and take out cars, bikes, and most importantly, the pedestrians. Huge numbers of pedestrians, particularly children, cross that intersection every morning and night, getting off in the bus and having to cross over 2 pedestrian crossings to get onto the city bus to go into the city, as well as those who go along Port Rush Road by bus. So the pedestrian section is also a major potential disaster, and that's why we wrote back in 2018, last year, when that truck rolled over at night and tipped its concrete load over the intersection where pedestrians would have been if that had happened during the day rather than at night. So hopefully someone will second it, and it will, be a motion that goes through pretty quickly. Councillor Davis.
Happy to second it, and it's good that we reiterate, but there's very little we can do apart from sending letters.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Councillor Henschke.
Oh, I was trying to second again, but I will. Yeah, but look, just simply, my teenage daughter, 16-year-old, I mentioned the accident the other day, and you're in the paper, and she just said, "What? All those trucks? They have to go." It's just the child's view of the world is what is going on in our adult world, allowing all these big trucks down this very busy area. So,
Councillor Lemon.
Yes, I've given this a lot of thought since I read the minutes, and I appreciate the sentiment behind it, but I think, and I'm not sure whether I'm going to amend it, I think that a letter from the CEO is a good idea, but as I say, I've given a lot of thought, and it appears to me that the problem is mainly the down track, and it appears to me that it's trucks. And it doesn't matter how many arrestor beds you've got, they tend not to use them for whatever reason, so having more arrestor beds is not going to make any difference. I actually don't think the configuration of the intersection will make that much difference either. So I feel that what we could do in this letter to the Minister is actually offer some alternatives, like, would you consider having the down track closed to trucks between the hours of 7 and 9:30 in the morning, and 4:30, the school run times in a real sense would be when trucks coming down the down track are much less likely to actually cause the sort of damage that they could in fact cause. And the reason I say that, and this is just something I came up with while I was weeding on the weekend, as you do, and I'm thinking, we need to look at different ways of doing it. The current state government's actually got a plan to have a ring route around the city so that they won't be coming down the down track on Glen Osmond Road, but that's not due to take off anytime soon. It's in their 2036 plan, so we're looking quite a long way hence. So I think, trucks are going to keep coming down the down track. What can we do to make things safer for people that use that intersection? We can actually control the times they come through that. So I would like to actually think that in this letter to the Minister, we could acknowledge that it is the down track that is a problem. It is the traffic at that intersection that is a problem. And could the minister turn his mind to other ways of controlling that so that trucks can be held at Stirling, Murray Bridge, whatever, Mount Barker, there's places, I don't know, wherever the last truck stop is, so that they come down the down track after the peak hour traffic has finished on that intersection, and the flow on intersections from there, because then they go down Crossroads and they go down Portrush Road. And I think that probably might be more useful than writing another, do something about this intersection, we don't want people killed anymore. I actually think that offering a solution is probably better. Because the other thing I think of as a public servant is the poor sod in Dipty that will get a folder of a particular colour and roll their eyes saying, oh God, another ministerial that I have to answer. And in fact, you know, you just don't want it to go in a folder and have a public servant answer it. You want the minister to actually really think about what you're proposing, and I think having some sort of solution, and that's the only one that I've come up with, and I would suggest that our collect just go out and do half an hour's weeding tomorrow night and send an email to Barry with what you might actually like to have as an alternative in terms of controlling the trucks at those peak hour times. So I'll support this, but I'd like the letter to have a bit of punch.
I'm happy to accept that as a variation. That it include the suggestion that trucks be limited during peak times.
When I speak again, I'd like to actually add a couple more things, so at the end, if that's okay.
Well, if you want to go into it now.
You would need to do it now because they're discussing it at this stage.
Oh, okay. I thought we did actually regarding that it was actually included in their continuing concerns about the safety. Because in the other emails, the other letters that we've already sent, actually we did provide suggestions of things to improve.
There was some suggestion, but that was more redesign.
Okay.
Helga's, Councillor Lemon is suggesting a new suggestion.
I don't actually agree with that, so...
Then it can't be taken into consideration.
And I'll explain when I sum up why. I use it so many times in a day. Councillor Davies.
Thank you, Worship. Yes, I too have given a lot of thought to this because I recall the issues we've had where we've raised it previously with the Minister and Dipty, and it's all on record there. And we know, and as a public servant or ex-public servant, I know how key areas in a portfolio are watched, and I know that they would have all the data on this for every incident and near miss and the dreadful crashes, and how that can be managed. And then looking at this in the big scheme of things, knowing that the government is investing huge amounts of money for infrastructure build changes to get the trucks to bypass Adelaide and to have different routes to avoid this key entry point to Adelaide as it is at the moment. So my thoughts are, would it be worthwhile you getting together with the other, since this is borderline with Unley Council and the Adelaide Hills Council, it would have more punch if you could get together with those mayors and have a joint proposal to put to the Minister and meet with him. Because I think you've already had a meeting with the Minister. Oh, I thought you'd met with him. And perhaps that would be a good way to deal with it and raise your concerns, which they must have and share too. So that's just my thoughts about it.
Councillor Cornish?
Leading on exactly from Councillor Davies' thoughts, because I think that's a really good idea. And the City of Marion has led this just recently with an entire train underpass that was a traffic issue for them at Oaklands. They opened their wallet and they went to the state government and said, hey, I know this is on the plan, but we want this really quickly because our community is fed up with these traffic jams and this traffic issue here. I completely agree. The state government has this plan to bypass it. It's not just our council that these trucks go through. It's Norwood, it's Walkerville, it's Prospect, it's all, just follow your way to Grand Junction Road. We could collectively get together and say, fed up with these trucks going down Portrush Road, down Cross Road, can we all chip in and let's get this plan for this bypass happening a lot faster, please. I think that might be another motion that comes to this council if we can't incorporate that here, because this is just a letter, identifying the issue. But if we really mean to do some work, let's open up the community's wallet and tie the state government to some KPIs to get this thing done a little bit faster, just like Marion did down at Oaklands.
Councillor Carbo.
Thank you, Worship. I just thought I'd share a bit of intel, given that I worked in the fruit and veg industry for 12 years, so it was our trucks that were going up and down the freeway every day, so I have to be a little bit careful with what I say. But just in terms of these times, look, a couple of things I'll say, okay? Number one is the union that controls the amount of hours that they drive and so forth is very strict, okay? I don't know, okay? But it's very strict. I know, but we're talking about putting it in the letter. No. Okay? Hang on a minute, all right? You talk, now it's my turn, all right? So just shut up for a minute. So just be careful about mentioning these sort of things moving forward about driving times and so forth. These trucks are coming all the way from Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne, so it is just the last 45 minutes of their journey, so that could be a big problem if they're almost here and then they have to pull over the side of the road and wait until 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock, so they're going to wait 3 hours. So that's going to be a big problem. They also are working to schedules that are outside their control, such as getting to the depots for Coles and Woolies and so forth. They have very small windows that they can deliver their loads. So just be careful when you go down this track of saying, oh, we can't have trucks on the road between 7 and 8 and 5 and 6 and so forth, because that's driven by factors that are way outside their control.
Okay, I'm going to sum up because I'm looking at the time, we've got to move on. There are a number of issues that could be tackled in the letter: resurfacing of the road, fixing the camber on the road. It's the right-hand turning into Portrush Road where most of the accidents are occurring. It's moving the traffic lane further back down Glen Osmond Road. There are a number of things that we can actually specifically relate that actually have been referred to in previous letters that we can follow up. And I certainly like the idea of talking with other mayors of the other councils, and I certainly would follow that up and maybe even arrange to meet with the Minister in relation to that. But I didn't want this incident to go again without us doing something, even if it was just to write a letter to say that we continue to be concerned and we are frustrated by the inaction. Certainly they reduced the speed on the freeway for trucks, and that has made a huge difference. Anyway, I'm going to stop right now. Those in favour? Those against? Carried unanimously. A motion... No, carried. Sorry, carried. No, sorry, apologies. Carried. We have a minute left to get a motion to extend till 11 o'clock, or not extend till 11 o'clock. We've got two, I believe, that we must do tonight.
It's not must. It would just,
no, not must.
It's not must. It would just extend the time.
At the next council meeting?
No,
okay. No? We've
If
got this one,
so
13.3 and 13.6, I believe, we need to do.
No, it just, sorry, 13.6 will just extend the consultation time to later.
Okay.
So it just means we'll miss the projected timelines in that. And
13.3?
It is, but it would be ideal if we could
Mm, well,
I'm happy to move 13.3 right now as read.
seconded. Those in favour? Right. Carried unanimously this time.
Mr. Matilda.
Okay, so Lane, that was 13.3 Matilda Lane. Now, do you wish to extend for up to half an hour or for 15 more minutes? No. We didn't have a second? Okay, it's finished. Okay, we close the meeting then at 10:30, 10:29 p.m.